The Version She Keeps. By Zelvara. Chapter 1, 22 Days. The fluorescence came on at 5:38 a.m. and Dani was already there. She had been there since 5:20, when the sky outside the high narrow windows was still the particular non-color that happened before dawn committed to anything. She'd learned, in 18 months at Haverfield and now 3 weeks into the transfer at Vantage Point, that the kitchen was safest before anyone else arrived in it. Not safer in any way she could have explained to a caseworker. Just, quieter, and hers, and uncomplicated by the performance of being around other people. She was counting. 22 days until her release date. She had been counting since day one, the way she'd learned to count everything, not obsessively, not with any particular feeling attached to the number, but the way a person tracks a thing they cannot control. You put a number to it. You update the number. It gives the uncontrollable a shape. She pulled the first sheet pan from the rack and set it on the counter. Breakfast prep at Vantage Point was less demanding than Haverfield's, smaller population, fewer dietary restrictions, the general sense that the halfway house operated at a slightly lower institutional pressure than the facility proper. Dani didn't know if she preferred it. She had learned the rhythms of the other kitchen like she'd learned the rhythms of everything, by watching, by mapping, by building a working model of the system in her head so there were no surprises. This kitchen was still half unknown. She liked knowing things. The industrial range was the same model as Haverfield's, which helped. She'd identified the left front burner as unreliable in the first week, it ran hot and didn't announce this, and had started pulling eggs off at 30 seconds early to compensate. Nobody had asked her to figure this out. She'd figured it out and adjusted and hadn't mentioned it, which was how she handled most things. She started the prep. There was a satisfaction in it that she wouldn't have called satisfaction out loud, wouldn't have given it a name at all, if someone asked. But the sequence of it, the logic of it, the mise en place as a form of problem solved before the problem arrived. Onions blocked and ready. Sheet pans oiled in sequence so the first in was the first out. Coffee started at 5:55 so it hit the right temperature for the 6:15 breakfast line. She wasn't performing efficiency. She was just efficient, and there was a difference, and the difference mattered to her even though she could not have articulated why. Bev had given her the morning shift without explanation, which Dani understood as respect. The evening shift required more management, more presence in the room while residents ate, more contact with people who were in the more volatile hours of their day. Bev had looked at Dani during intake and given her mornings. Dani hadn't thanked her. Bev hadn't seemed to need it. 22 days. She had a plan for after. Not an ambitious plan, she was not a woman who made ambitious plans, because ambition required a certain faith in forward motion that she'd had stripped from her by increments, starting young, and she didn't particularly want it back. What she had instead was a practical plan. A friend from before, from the life before Haverfield, before the fight, before the night that became the 18 months that became the counting, had a brother who did HVAC work in Bridgeport. There was a possibility of an apprenticeship. There was a room she could rent while she figured out the paperwork. There was a path from here to there that was narrow and specific and possible, and she had been holding on to possible for a year and a half without letting herself look at it too directly, the way you don't look directly at something you need until you're sure you can have it. She cracked the first dozen eggs. The yolks were pale, which she noted without judgment. You worked with what the kitchen had. You did not spend energy wishing the kitchen had better eggs. The thing about 22 days, and she had been thinking about this in the way she thought about most things that bothered her, which was sideways, not head-on, was that it had started to feel different than it had a month ago. A month ago, the number had been a simple subtraction problem. You subtracted days and got closer to the exit and the exit was the point. Now there was something behind the number that she didn't have a clean word for. Not dread. Something adjacent to dread. The sense that the exit was also a beginning, and beginning was a word that required the existence of something worth beginning toward, and she was not sure she had that. She had the HVAC possibility. She had the room. She had 18 months of having needed nothing she couldn't carry, and she was good at that. She was very good at that. It was the most efficient system she had ever built. She added the eggs to the pan and did not think about what the alternative to efficient systems looked like, which was, exposed, insufficient, the version of herself that had looked at Greta 4 years ago and been unable to ask for what she needed until Greta had already learned to stop offering it. She did not think about the specific quality of Greta's voice in the last month of it, the way it had gone, careful the way people's voices go when they are managing someone they have given up on. She did not think about the thing she had said, finally, too late, standing in a parking lot in the rain, "I need you to stay." And the way Greta had looked at her, not unkindly, and said, "I know. I needed you to say that 6 months ago." She did not think about this. She turned the eggs. The kitchen had a window that faced east, and by 5:50 the light outside had turned from non-color to something that almost qualified as gold, and it came in at an angle that lit up the steam from the pots and made the whole room look, briefly, like somewhere that was worth being. Dani noticed this without sentimentality. She had learned, inside, to notice small good things without building on them. You noted the thing. You let it be what it was. You did not make it carry the weight of everything you were not feeling. She pulled the sheet pans from the oven. The door to the kitchen swung open at 5:58 and Ruthie came in the way Ruthie always came in, which was with the particular energy of someone who had already been awake for 2 hours and resented only one of those hours. "Morning," Ruthie said, not as a greeting but as an acknowledgement that the world had, improbably, continued to exist. "Morning," Dani said. Ruthie moved to the coffee station with the focused commitment of a woman executing a search and rescue operation. She was 52 and had a quality of having seen most things twice, which gave her a bluntness that other people sometimes mistook for cruelty and which Dani had learned, over the 3 weeks she'd been at Vantage Point, was something closer to the opposite. Ruthie said what was true. She said it plainly and then stopped saying it. Dani found this restful in a way she would not have expected. "You did the left burner again," Ruthie said, watching the eggs. "Runs hot. Bev's been putting in the maintenance request for 6 months. Doesn't fix the eggs this morning," Dani said. Ruthie poured her coffee. She considered this. "No," she agreed. "It doesn't." She settled at the prep counter with her mug, and for a while there was just the ambient noise of the kitchen doing what kitchens did, which was hum and heat and produce a low steady demand that Dani found, if not comforting, then at least preferable to the other thing. The other thing being nothing. The other thing being the inside of her own head without the buffer of work. "We've got new intake today," Ruthie said. "I heard. Kitchen assignment effective tomorrow. Bev's putting her on your shift." Dani didn't answer. She was plating the first round and the timing required attention. "Just so you know," Ruthie said. "Okay." Ruthie watched her plate for a moment. "Then, you're not going to ask?" "No. You don't want to know anything about her before she gets here?" "I'll know what I need to know when she gets here," Dani said. "Don't need a preview." Ruthie made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of someone confirming a hypothesis they'd made before. She drank her coffee. The kitchen hummed. 22 days. Dani moved the first tray to the line and started the second one. The light through the east window had gone from gold to ordinary by now, and the steam was just steam again, and the kitchen smelled like every kitchen she'd ever worked, the specific combination of institutional cleaner and old grease and something underneath both of those things that she'd never been able to name. She'd stopped trying. She was fine. The word came to her the way it always did, smooth and automatic and sufficient. She tested it the way she sometimes tested it, not because she doubted it but because she was careful. She checked the edges of it for soft spots, for places where fine was doing work it couldn't support. The eggs were done. The coffee was ready. The breakfast line would open in 18 minutes and she would be there to run it and it would go the way it always went, and afterward she would clean her station and do the prep list for lunch and take her 30-minute break in the back where there was a plastic chair that faced the wall and she would sit in that chair and she would not think about anything in particular. Fine. She set the last tray down. 22 days, and she was not thinking about what came after them. She was thinking about the left front burner, and the eggs, and the 18 minutes before the line opened. She was thinking about the work in front of her. This was the system. The system worked. She pushed through into the serving area and did not look at the east window again, and the light by then was just the light, and the day had begun. Chapter 2, The Performance Review. The intake coordinator's name was Priya Nath, and she had the kind of stillness that Soleil recognized immediately as professional, not calm, exactly, but managed. The stillness of someone who had learned to keep their responses neutral because their responses were, in this context, beside the point. Soleil recognized it because she had it too. "You can have a seat," Priya said, and gestured at the chair across the desk without looking up from the file she was reviewing. The file was Soleil's, presumably, though Priya had the manner of someone reading it for the first time, which meant either she was thorough or she was making a point about process. Soleil decided it was the latter and filed it. Priya Nath was someone who believed in the framework and wanted her clients to believe in it too. Fine. Soleil could work with that. She sat. She folded her hands in her lap, then reconsidered, too composed, potentially reading as defensive, and moved them to the armrests, relaxed. She'd had 3 hours since arriving at Vantage Point to read this room. She'd spent the first of those hours moving into the room she'd been assigned, which was small and neutral and smelled like industrial cleaner overlaid with someone's old fabric softener. She'd spent the second hour meeting 2 residents in passing, a woman named Ruthie who had offered a brief, appraising nod, and another woman whose name Soleil hadn't caught who'd been carrying laundry and hadn't stopped. The third hour she'd spent in here, in this office with the motivational quote on the wall, the kind that was framed, which she found more concerning than a taped-up printout, because framed quotes required a trip to a store, and Priya Nath's desk between them. She had the picture now. She knew what to do. How was the transfer process? Priya asked. Still looking at the file. Testing something. Smoother than I expected, Soleil said. Honest enough to be credible, brief enough to not perform gratitude. The staff at the facility were thorough. Any concerns about the transition? It's common to feel. I feel ready, Soleil said. Not interrupting, just catching the sentence before it offered her an emotion she hadn't chosen. I've been thinking about this phase for a while. I want to do it right. Priya looked up from the file then. She had dark, assessing eyes and the kind of face that probably looked the same at 35 as it would at 50, which Soleil suspected was a product of discipline rather than luck. She held Soleil's gaze for a beat that was slightly longer than neutral. That's good to hear, Priya said, and her tone made it clear she had heard it before and was reserving judgment on it. Which was correct of her. Soleil did not hold it against her. The intake assessment moved through its standard architecture. History of substance use, current medications, previous treatment programs, support network outside the facility. Soleil had answered these questions in intake sessions before, not at Vantage Point, not this program, but the questions were a consistent genre, and she understood the genre. She gave the version of her answers that was true in its component parts and carefully curated in its total effect. She described her support network in terms that communicated stability without overclaiming warmth. She described her goals, housing, employment, reconnecting with a few people she'd let drop, in terms that were specific enough to sound real and general enough not to be tested. She talked about her relationship with the process in the language the process expected: accountability, growth, building structures that support the work. She did not perform eagerness. Eagerness was the error most people made. Coming in, they gave the caseworker what they thought was wanted, and what they thought was wanted was enthusiasm, and enthusiasm in an intake session read as either naive or calculated. Soleil gave Priya something closer to sober resolve. I know what this costs and I'm prepared to pay it. She had found, across multiple intake sessions across multiple years, that sober resolve was what good caseworkers were actually looking for. It gave them something to believe in without requiring them to protect you from yourself. Priya wrote notes. She asked follow-up questions that were pointed in a way that confirmed she was good at her job. Soleil answered them with the kind of care that was itself a form of performance, selecting the most accurate feeling response quickly enough that it didn't look selected. She was very, very good at this. At 40 minutes in, Priya set her pen down and looked at Soleil with something that might have been appreciation for the session they'd had, or might have been the professional equivalent of a pause to recalibrate. I want to talk about kitchen assignment, Priya said. We try to have residents contributing to house operations within the first few days. It builds routine, which matters a lot in this phase. Of course, Soleil said. I'm comfortable in a kitchen. Is that a background, or preference? Both. She'd worked 2 restaurant jobs in her 20s, before. She knew how to move in a kitchen, how to read the hierarchy of it, how to make herself useful without requiring supervision. This was true. She offered it without embellishment. You'll be on the morning shift starting tomorrow, Priya said. There's one other resident on that shift currently. She's on a 3-week overlap before her release date. Name's Dani. I don't anticipate any issues, but come to me if there are. Soleil nodded. I appreciate you being direct about the setup. Priya considered her for a moment. Then, I want to say something, and I want you to hear it in the spirit it's intended. Here it was. The real thing, whatever it was. The residents who do well here, Priya said, are usually not the ones who are best at the process. They're the ones who are willing to be uncertain. I've read your file. You've been in programs before. You know how these go. Sometimes that knowledge is an asset. She paused. Sometimes it becomes a way of going through motions very convincingly. Soleil held the eye contact. She didn't react. She let the observation sit for a moment and then said, carefully, I hear that. Good. Priya picked her pen up again. That's all I was going to say. The session ended at the 48-minute mark. Priya marked the file. Soleil caught the word satisfactory without trying, old habit, and stood to indicate they were done. They shook hands. Soleil thanked her with the specific calibration of warmth that meant I found this useful without meaning I need you. She walked out into the hallway. It was narrow, painted a beige that had been meant to be soothing and had aged into something more like surrender. 2 fluorescent lights, one slightly off color relative to the other. A corkboard with sign-up sheets and a house meeting schedule and a printout about medication management that had been there long enough to curl at the corners. Soleil stood in the hallway and let herself just stand there for a moment. The session had gone well. Priya was sharp, which meant it was a better session than average. There was something that functioned like satisfaction in performing well for a good audience. She had given Priya the version of herself that was credible and engaged and on the right track, and Priya had received it with appropriate skepticism and appropriate purchase, and the file now said satisfactory, and the morning shift started tomorrow. She was doing it right. She found her room. The door was open because she hadn't yet located a reason to close it. The small assertion of privacy felt premature in a place where privacy was still something she was mapping. She started unpacking her second bag, the one with the books and the one photograph she'd kept and the small, useless things that were hers and therefore necessary. She put the photograph in the drawer of the bedside table, face down. Not yet. Footsteps in the hallway, unhurried. A woman she hadn't met yet, moving past the door without looking in. Then a pause, and backtrack. Soleil looked up. The woman was somewhere in her 50s, comfortable in her body in the way of someone who'd stopped performing anything for anyone a long time ago. She was looking at Soleil with the specific quality of attention of someone who had seen a lot of things arrive through that doorway and had developed opinions about what those things meant. New intake, the woman said. Yes. Soleil. Ruthie. She'd met this one already, in passing. Ruthie was taking a second look, apparently. You need anything? I'm fine, thank you. Ruthie looked at her for a moment, not unkindly, but with a thoroughness that Soleil noticed, and then said, not stopping, already moving on down the hall, you don't have to be that good at it in here. Nobody's grading you. And she was gone. Soleil stood with a book in her hand. She could hear the house around her, someone's television, the sound of a door, a laugh from somewhere below. The ordinary sounds of a place that had people in it. She was in a room in that place, and her file said satisfactory, and tomorrow she would start the morning kitchen shift, and in 3 to 4 months, if she did this correctly, she would leave with her paperwork in order and her next chapter started. She was doing it right. She put the book on the shelf, spine facing out, and did not think about what Priya had said because she had already filed it and filed it and filed it, and she was not going to think about it now. Nobody's grading you. She straightened the books that didn't need straightening, the way she always straightened things, and told herself it was habit and not performance, and in the absence of anyone to convince, almost believed it. Chapter 3, What the Kitchen Already Knows. There were 2 things wrong with the Vantage Point kitchen that Dani had identified in her first week that nobody had gotten around to fixing, and 1 thing wrong that nobody had noticed. The left front burner she'd already compensated for. The exhaust fan above the range had a belt that was going. She'd heard it on the 3rd morning, a faint irregularity in the pitch of it, the mechanical equivalent of a hitch in breathing, and she'd mentioned it to Bev, who had written it on the maintenance list, which lived on a clipboard by the back door and appeared to be the place where maintenance items went to wait for a year. She'd stopped mentioning it. She watched the belt. When it went, she'd deal with it. The 3rd thing was the industrial refrigerator seal on the left door, which had developed a gap at the bottom right corner that allowed just enough warm air to infiltrate that the temperature inside ran about 2 degrees higher than the thermostat read. She'd caught this because she'd noticed condensation forming on the milk containers in a way that wasn't right, and she'd stood at the refrigerator for a long moment doing the math before she'd checked the seal with her hand and felt the draft. She'd folded a piece of cardboard and wedged it into the gap as a temporary measure, which was not a real fix, which she understood, but was better than the alternative while the thing sat on Bev's clipboard. Bev had noticed her doing this. Refrigerator? Bev had said, from the doorway. Seal's going on the left door. Bev looked at the cardboard wedge. She had the quality of someone who had long ago made peace with the gap between what a thing needed and what resources existed to give it. I'll add it to the list. Already on the list. Bev made a sound. I'll move it up the list. That had been 2 days ago. The cardboard was still there. Dani checked it each morning, pressed it back into the gap if it had shifted, and moved on. This was how things worked. You didn't get the real fix immediately. You worked with the temporary measure and you kept the thing functioning, and eventually someone came with the part or didn't, and in the meantime the milk was cold enough. She had been doing the thing she did in every kitchen she'd ever been in, which was learn it from the inside out. Not from the prep list, not from whoever handed her the apron, from the kitchen itself, from the way its problems announced themselves if you paid the right kind of attention. She had learned this from her grandmother's kitchen, which had been small and loud and run by a woman who fixed everything with what was available and replaced nothing until it was dead, and who had been the most competent person Dani had ever known. She was thinking about none of this consciously. She was moving through the morning prep with the focused absence of thought that was her best state, hands doing the work, mind clear, the kitchen's rhythms carrying her forward. You fixed the refrigerator, Ruthie said. Not a question, not a compliment. Just a notation. Temporary. Still. Ruthie was doing the biscuit prep, the one task she claimed as hers without explaining why, and which Dani had not contested. There was a hierarchy to what was whose in a kitchen, and you learned it the same way you learned the rest, by watching, by not reaching for what wasn't offered. Bev was going to duct tape it. Duct tape doesn't make the right seal. No. Ruthie cut the butter into the flour with the efficiency of someone who had done it 10,000 times. It doesn't. They worked for a while. Outside, the morning was going gray-blue toward gray, the light through the east window flat and without the brief gold of yesterday. Rain later, probably. Dani had learned to read the sky from this window and found she liked the particular neutrality of a heavy cloud morning. It asked nothing, it made no promises, it was just weather. 20 years ago, Ruthie said, not preambling it, the way she talked, I was in a kitchen in Macon that had a range with 3 working burners out of 6 and a walk-in that iced over every 3 days because the defrost cycle was broken. You know what we did? Managed, Dani said. We managed, Ruthie agreed. You get good at working around the broken thing and you forget, after a while, that the broken thing isn't just how it is. She pressed the biscuit dough. Then one day somebody fixes it and you don't know what to do with a kitchen that works right. Dani didn't answer. She was turning this over without turning it over, the way she processed most things, let it sit at the edge of attention, not looking at it directly. Bev came in at 7:15 with her clipboard and her coffee and the particular energy of a woman who had already accomplished several things before the kitchen staff had arrived. She was 60 and ran on a kind of efficient momentum that Dani respected without feeling the need to name. Bev moved through the kitchen the way people moved through spaces they had earned, without announcing herself, checking things by instinct rather than by list. She stopped at the refrigerator. Looked at the cardboard. "The part's on order," she said. "Okay," Dani said. "Should be here by Thursday." "Okay." Bev looked at her. Then at the refrigerator. Then back. "You do this at Haverfield too?" "Do what?" "Find the broken things." "Hard to miss," Dani said. Bev made a sound that was not quite a laugh and moved on to the clipboard. There was a quality in the way she did this that Dani had learned to read as approval, which was fine. Bev's approval cost nothing and required nothing and sat lightly, which was the only kind Dani had use for. "New intake starting tomorrow," Bev said, to her clipboard. "Ruthie told me. I'm putting her on mornings with you." She flipped a page. "Name's Soleil Marchand. Came over from the facility at Caldwell. She's got kitchen experience." Dani was checking the prep list. She noted the name without responding to it. "She'll shadow you for the first shift," Bev said. "After that you can figure out the division between you." "Fine." Bev looked up from the clipboard then, just briefly, with the quality of attention she deployed when she was deciding whether to say something. Whatever she decided, she didn't say it. She made a small mark on the clipboard and moved toward the door. "Ruthie," she said, at the doorway. Biscuits need to be done by 6:40 today. We've got an early house meeting." "They'll be done," Ruthie said, without looking up from the dough. Bev left. The kitchen settled back into its rhythm. The thing about a kitchen, and Dani had worked in enough of them, institutional and otherwise, to have developed something like a philosophy about it, was that it was honest in a way most spaces weren't. You couldn't perform competence in a kitchen the way you could perform it in a meeting or an intake session. Either the food was on time or it wasn't. Either the temperature was right or it wasn't. Either the space was clean at the end of the shift or it wasn't. The kitchen didn't care what you said about yourself. It only cared what you did. She had liked this, in some kitchen or another she couldn't specifically remember, before everything. She had liked it again at Haverfield, once she'd gotten her footing. She liked it here. It was a reliable thing about herself, the liking of a kitchen, and she held on to reliable things because they cost nothing to carry. The morning went the way mornings went. Breakfast line at 6:15. 112 small decisions, most of them automatic. Ruthie's biscuits were done at 6:38, which gave them 2 minutes to spare, and they were good biscuits. Dani had learned this in week 1 and had not said so, and Ruthie had not required her to. The line moved. The residents came through with their trays and their conversations and their various states of mourning, and Dani kept the steam table full and watched the left front burner and did not think about things that weren't in front of her. After the line, the cleanup. This was the part Dani preferred. The active work of the kitchen going down, the steam table broken apart and scrubbed, the pans soaked and washed, the floor swept and then mopped in the right order so you weren't tracking through your own work. There was a satisfaction in taking a used kitchen back to zero that she had tried to explain to exactly one person in her life, who had not understood it, and she had not tried again. She was mopping the far corner when Ruthie said, from the sink, "You know anything about her? The new one?" "No. Caldwell's a harder place than here." "Most places are harder than here," Dani said. Ruthie considered this. True. She ran the water for the last rinse. "I'm just saying. Sometimes people come from harder places and they've built something that works there that doesn't work as well once they've got more room." She turned off the water. "Takes them a while to figure out they can put it down." Dani moved the mop bucket toward the door. "You know her?" "Know the type," Ruthie said. "I've been here long enough to know the types." Dani wrung the mop. She was not going to ask what type. She was not going to be curious about the intake who was starting tomorrow. She was going to go to her room and read the book she was not yet halfway through, and she was going to have her 30 minutes in the chair by the wall, and she was going to subtract another day from the number. 21 days. She looked put together, Ruthie said. When I passed her room. Really put together. The kind that takes work. Ruthie. I'm just talking. I know. You don't have to listen. I know, Dani said, and pushed through the door with the mop bucket, and let the kitchen go quiet behind her. She stood in the back hallway for a moment with the mop in her hands. The hallway smelled like the cleaning solution and the old building underneath it. Through the wall she could hear the faint activity of the house, someone on the stairs, someone's radio. The ordinary sounds of a place holding people through the difficult work of becoming whatever came next. She did not think about the new intake. She put the mop away. She washed her hands at the utility sink, the water cold because the hot took a full minute to come through and she never waited for it, and she dried her hands on the rough paper towels, and she went to find her chair and her book. 21 days. The number was a shape she could hold. She held it. Chapter 4, New Intake. She was assembled. That was Dani's first read, and she gave it in under 10 seconds, which was about how long it took her to assess most things. The woman who came through the kitchen door at 5:55 a.m. was assembled the way a person was assembled when they'd been doing it for so long the assembly happened automatically. Hair up, practical. Clothes that had no business being that coordinated inside a halfway house morning shift. A posture that communicated I belong here without leaning on it. She scanned the room in the first 3 seconds with eyes that were doing the exact same math Dani was doing, reading the space, reading the person in it, establishing the terrain. Then she found Dani at the range and her expression did the specific thing of someone who had expected to find a person and was recalibrating that person against whatever they'd been told. Dani, she said. Yeah. Soleil. She crossed the kitchen with the assurance of someone who was comfortable in kitchens and didn't need to prove it. Extended her hand. Bev said to shadow you this morning. Dani shook it. Prep lists on the counter. Soleil found the list. She read it with the focused attention of someone who actually intended to use it, not just acknowledge it. Dani watched this from the range without appearing to watch it. What do you want me to start with? Soleil asked. Onions. Cutting boards behind you. Half-inch dice. No further instruction. Either she could do it or she'd ask, and Dani would know either way what she was working with. Soleil found the onions, found the cutting board, found the knife without being directed to the knife drawer. Positioned herself at the prep counter and started breaking down the first onion with a technique that was competent and efficient and had been learned somewhere that knew what it was doing. Dani watched the half-inch dice take shape, noted the consistency, and turned back to the range. Fine. The woman could cook. They worked in silence for 20 minutes. It was not uncomfortable silence, which surprised Dani slightly. Most new people filled silence with positioning, with the social work of establishing themselves, with questions that were really statements. Soleil did not do this. She worked through the onion prep and then looked up at the list and moved to the next item without asking, which was the peppers, and she cut those with the same quiet efficiency. She was performing, though. Dani could feel it. Not in any specific thing, the technique was real, the efficiency was real, but in the quality of it. A competence that knew it was being watched. The way she placed herself relative to the range, slightly angled, which gave Dani a good sight line and was not accidental. The way she didn't look at Dani directly but was very clearly aware of exactly where Dani was. She was working for the room. Dani had done enough of this herself to know it when she saw it, and she noted it and returned to her eggs and did not make anything of it. New person, new kitchen, first shift. You put your best work forward. That was reasonable. That didn't mean anything beyond itself. At 6:10, 5 minutes before the line opened, Soleil said, "The left burner's running hot." Dani pulled the eggs she'd been watching. "Yeah. I pulled mine at about 30 seconds early." "Is that right?" 25, usually. "I'll adjust." No performance in that. Just information, updated and stored. Dani found herself recalibrating, slightly. Noticing things about a kitchen in the first 10 minutes of a shift was not the same as performing noticing things. That one had been real. The line opened. Soleil moved to the serving side without being directed, read the setup, and positioned herself at the end of the steam table to handle the portion that needed the most active management. Correct call. Either Bev had briefed her or she'd figured it out from the layout. Dani did not ask which. The line moved. Soleil worked it the way experienced kitchen staff worked it, focused, efficient, warm with the residents in a way that was calibrated just right, not performing warmth, but also not indifferent. She learned 2 names in the first 15 minutes. She remembered them for the next person. Dani watched this and thought, she is very, very good at this. And then, at what, exactly? The kitchen or the room? She didn't answer that. She kept the steam table full and watched the left front burner and did not think about it further. After the line, clean up. Soleil worked clean, which was the correct thing, and didn't require direction, which was also correct. By 7:15 the kitchen was down and Dani was filling the mop bucket and Soleil was at the sink finishing the last of the pans and there was, again, the silence. How long until your release? Soleil asked. Not a personal question, exactly. More like, establishing a timeline, understanding the parameters of who she was working with. Dani gave her that. 21 days. Vantage point's good for a last placement, Soleil said. Not sycophantic, just a statement. Better than some. What do you know about it? I asked around before I got here, Soleil said. She was rinsing the last pan. It helps to know what you're walking into. Does it? She turned off the water and reached for the dish towel. Looked at Dani directly for the first time that morning, light brown eyes with an assessment in them that was practiced and fast and landed before Dani had finished deciding how to receive it. I find it does, she said. There was something in the way she said it that was almost like honesty. Almost. Dani picked up the mop. Shift starts at 5:50 tomorrow, she said. Prep list changes on Tuesdays, more volume, different items. I'll leave you the updated version. I'll be here, Soleil said. Dani nodded and started on the floor, and after a moment she heard Soleil's footsteps go to the door and then stop. Thank you, Soleil said. For the run-through. You didn't need much of one. A brief pause. No, Soleil said, and there was something in that one-word response that was slightly different, less managed, more actual. I guess I didn't. Then she was gone. Dani mopped the floor in the order she always mopped it, far corner to near, and she thought about what it meant that the most real thing the woman had said in a 2-hour shift was 2 words at the end of it. She thought about whether that was interesting or whether she was manufacturing something to think about. She decided it was neither. She finished the floor. She put the mop away. 21 days. She washed her hands and she went to find her book. The thing Soleil had not been prepared for, and she had been prepared for most things, preparation was the foundation, always, was the quality of Dani's attention. She had been looked at before. She was often looked at. She was the kind of woman who was looked at in the room she entered, which she had accepted a long time ago as a fact rather than a value, and which she had learned to use rather than resent. People looked at her and she met the look and she gave them the version of herself that was most useful and moved on. Dani Reyes had not looked at her that way. She'd looked at her the way you looked at a problem you were solving. Steady, thorough, not interested in performing the looking. When Soleil had caught her at it, twice, 3 times during the morning, there had been no social flinch, no recalibration, no pretense. Just, I am looking at you to understand something, and I haven't finished yet. Soleil had found it, standing at the prep counter dicing peppers, briefly and unexpectedly disconcerting. This was the disorienting part, and she was still turning it over at 11 o'clock, sitting at the small desk in her room with a cup of coffee she'd made herself in the shared kitchen down the hall. She had been in this room for 18 hours. She had her intake assessment behind her, her first kitchen shift behind her, and the first read she'd taken of this place was manageable. The population was smaller than the facility the structure was looser, the staff ran the place with a pragmatism that was more functional than punitive. She could work in this environment. She'd worked in more difficult ones. What she had not yet filed away was Dani. She had deployed her usual approach: warmth, interest, competence calibrated to be visible without being showy, and Dani had received none of it. Not rejected it, not been hostile to it, just not hungry for it. The way a person wasn't hungry when they'd already eaten. She ran the program and it returned nothing, and she ran it again, slightly adjusted, and it returned nothing again, and by the end of the shift she had the particular sense of having performed for a room that had emptied while she wasn't looking. What Dani had wanted from her was the half-inch dice. That was it. The correct technique, the correct execution, the correct contribution to the function of the kitchen. And when she'd identified the burner issue herself, which she had identified herself, she hadn't been told, she'd caught it because she was good in a kitchen and she actually had been paying attention. Dani had given her a piece of real information in return. 25 seconds, not 30. Not as a reward, not as warmth. Just as the useful thing. It should not have been interesting. She picked up the coffee and it was too cold and she drank it anyway, because she had learned not to waste things, and she thought about what Priya had said yesterday. Sometimes knowledge of the process becomes a way of going through motions very convincingly. She hadn't thought that applied to her and Dani specifically. She'd thought it applied to her and Priya. The coffee was cold and the morning light was making its way through the single window at an angle that hit the wall and made a shape she didn't have a name for, and she thought, the woman doesn't want anything from the version of me I showed up with. She thought, that should make things simpler. She was not sure why it didn't. Chapter 5, Fine. On the fourth day of working with Soleil, Dani decided not to notice her. This was not a dramatic decision. It did not involve any particular moment of reckoning. It was simply the conclusion of a quiet internal argument she had been losing slowly, the argument being, she is not your business, you have 20 days left, you have a plan, you do not need to be curious about anyone. She was good at not being curious about people. She had learned it in increments, starting with Greta and ending here, and the muscle was developed and reliable. You simply redirected. When your attention moved toward a person, you gave it something else: the prep list, the faulty burner, the seal on the refrigerator door, the number. 20 days. The number was always available. She redirected. It mostly worked. The part that didn't work was the part where you could not stop someone from being interesting by deciding they weren't. Soleil moved through the kitchen with a quality of attention that was genuinely impressive, and genuinely, Dani was increasingly certain, not entirely what it appeared to be. She watched the room. She adjusted. She was different, slightly, consistently, when she thought she wasn't being watched, and the difference was in the direction of less. Less polish, less warmth, less of the curated ease that she wore like a garment. In those moments she was still competent, still present, just quieter. More like the person who had said no, I guess I didn't, in that flat, briefly honest way on the first morning. Dani had filed this and was actively choosing not to return to the file. Soleil asked about the exhaust fan. Ruthie said, on day 5, over the prep counter. What about it? You can hear it doing the thing. She asked if we'd reported it. Ruthie paused. I told her it was on the list. It is on the list. She said she knew something about HVAC belts. Said she had a friend who did the work. Dani kept her eyes on the pan. Good for her. A pause. She wasn't performing that one, Ruthie said. I didn't ask. I know you didn't. Dani turned the eggs. Ruthie. I'm just telling you what I noticed. You notice a lot. I've been here a long time, Ruthie said. You run out of other things to do. She went back to her biscuits with the air of someone who had said exactly what she meant and had no investment in what was done with it. The days had their own architecture by now. Dani knew the shape of a morning shift the way she knew most things she'd spent enough time inside, not consciously, but in the body, the sequence available without thinking. 5:20 arrival. The east window. The prep in order. The line at 6:15. Clean up. the chair and the book. The afternoon with whatever the afternoon had, the house meeting, the maintenance tasks she took on without being asked, the walk around the small fenced yard that was technically recreation time and which she used to think. Soleil had her own shape. Different shift structure. She had a check-in with Priya on Tuesdays, a phone call she made on Thursday evenings from the shared phone in the common room, the same careful management of her room that Dani had noticed through the open door in passing. Soleil's room looked like a controlled environment. Nothing out of place, nothing superfluous. It had the quality of a space in which a person maintained order because disorder was a kind of evidence they couldn't afford to leave. Dani understood this without admiring it. On day 7, Soleil said, "Do you read?" Dani was mopping. "What?" "Books. Do you read?" She nodded at the pocket of Dani's jacket, where the spine of the current book was visible. Dani looked down at it, then back up. "Sometimes." "What are you reading?" "History," Dani said, which was true and also deflective, because it was a particular kind of history that she was not going to explain. "Military history or the other kind?" "Labor history," Dani said. "Union organizing. Early 20th century." A brief silence. Then Soleil said, with the first genuine-sounding interest she'd expressed about anything that wasn't the kitchen, "Really? You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised," Soleil said, which sounded like she was recalibrating something. My grandmother had a book like that. About the garment workers. She kept it on the coffee table." "The Triangle Fire?" Dani said. "I don't remember the title. I was young. She would talk about it like it was, I don't know, personal. Even though it was decades before she was born. Because it was about the conditions that shaped her conditions," Dani said. "You don't have to have been there for it to be about you." Soleil looked at her with the direct, assessing look she deployed when something had landed unexpectedly. Then she picked up the dish towel and went back to drying the pans and said, without performing it, without the warmth register she usually used, "That's true." It was the most real thing she'd said in a week. Dani finished the floor and did not look at the file she had decided not to open. 20 days. 19. 18. She was fine. She tested the word with the same careful attention she always tested it and found its edges held, and did not examine whether she was pressing on those edges harder than she used to, or what that might mean about the word's structural integrity. Fine. She was fine. Chapter 6, The Teflon Hour. There was a stretch of the morning shift, roughly between 7 and 7:45, after cleanup had started and before it finished, that Soleil had begun to think of privately as the Teflon Hour. It was the hour in which nothing she deployed worked on Dani. She had named it not because the naming helped but because the naming was how she processed things she couldn't immediately solve, and she could not immediately solve this. She was good at people. She was demonstrably, consistently, professionally good at people, and she had been good at them for long enough that the skill had stopped feeling like a skill and had become more like a thing she simply was. She read rooms. She read people in rooms. She gave them what the reading said they wanted and she adjusted when the first read was off, and she had never, not in 34 years, not in 3 different programs, not in Caldwell, where the particular density of need in a room could have overwhelmed a less calibrated person, run into a wall like Dani Reyes. The problem was not that Dani was cold. Cold she could work with. Cold meant something was underneath and you found the edge of it and you applied warmth at the correct temperature and you waited. The problem was that Dani was simply not available in the way that people were usually available. She didn't need anything from Soleil. She didn't want to be seen by her, or managed, or made comfortable. She wanted the half-inch dice and the burner watched and the floor swept in the right order, and she gave back exactly the same calibration of practical exchange, and when Soleil tried to offer anything beyond that, a laugh, an observation, the specific quality of personal attention that made people feel genuinely noticed, Dani received it the way you received weather. Noted. Acknowledged. Not particularly useful. It was baffling. It was, she was beginning to understand, something else. She was at the sink on a Thursday morning, 11 days into the shift routine, rinsing the breakfast pans. Dani was nearby at the prep counter doing the inventory count, which she did at the end of every shift with the focus of someone disarming something. She had a notebook for it, a small spiral-bound one, and she wrote in a hand that was small and precise and which Soleil had noticed was left-handed, which for some reason she had noted and then noted that she'd noted it. "We're low on dried beans," Dani said. "To the inventory, not to Soleil. I can flag it for Bev. I'll do it. I'm walking past her office." A pause. Dani looked up from the notebook. "Okay," she said, and tore the relevant page out and handed it to Soleil without further comment. Their fingers did not touch. It was not a significant moment. Soleil filed it anyway, because she had been filing things about Dani since day one and she had stopped being able to explain why. The thing she kept coming back to, in the Teflon hour, was this: Dani was not indifferent. Indifference had a quality to it, a lightness, a sense of not registering. Dani registered. She watched Soleil with the assessing, problem-solving attention she deployed on the first morning and had not put down since, and it landed on Soleil's skin like pressure every time, and she was searching for the right word and kept arriving at the wrong ones. Unsettling. Clarifying. A little like being read by someone who had no investment in the story they were reading and therefore nothing to protect. She had never had that from a person before. Every person who had ever paid attention to her had wanted something from the attention. Had needed the return. Had been, in some way, performing the attentiveness toward their own ends, warmth, connection, the particular gratification of being the person who got through to Soleil Marchand, which was apparently, judging by her history, a thing people wanted. Dani didn't want to get through to her. Dani just kept watching, patiently, without an agenda, the way you watched something you hadn't finished understanding. Soleil did not know what to do with this. She took the inventory page to Bev's office, knocked, delivered it. Bev took it, said thank you, and looked at Soleil for a beat that was slightly longer than administrative. "You settling in all right?" Bev asked. "Fine," Soleil said. "Good." "Yes." Bev wrote something on the page. "Kitchen shift going okay?" "It's a well-run shift," Soleil said. Bev made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite anything else. "Dani runs it right," she said. "She's got a week and a half left. You'll have more latitude once she's gone." Soleil nodded. This was true and she had been aware of it and had not felt about it the way she might have expected to feel about it, which was relieved. She was aware of this. She walked back to the kitchen. Dani was still at the prep counter. She had finished the inventory and was now doing something with the industrial mixer that had been sitting slightly out of alignment since the last time someone had moved it for cleaning. She was working one of the feet, adjusting the leveling, without looking like she was doing anything other than standing near it. Just the hands. Just the quiet competence of a person who fixed things and didn't say so. Soleil watched her from the doorway for 1 second. Just one. Then she came the rest of the way in and said, "Bev got the list." "Good," Dani said. "She said the beans will be in by Tuesday." "Okay." She was still adjusting the foot. Not looking at the mixer, really. Looking like someone whose hands had taken over while their mind was elsewhere. Soleil watched the small, precise adjustments and thought about what Ruthie had said 2 weeks ago, before she'd arrived. At least, she assumed Ruthie had said something, because Ruthie always said something, and the residents here had been watching each other navigate the building for long enough to have things to say. "Nobody's grading you." The words came back to her unexpectedly, the way they kept doing. The way they had been doing for 11 days in a kitchen where the most honest thing another person had done was fix the refrigerator seal with a piece of cardboard and not mention it. "The mixer was off level," she said. Dani looked up. "Yeah. You didn't say anything. Fixed it just now." "I know. I watched." A small pause. Something moved in Dani's expression, not much, but something. She stepped back from the mixer and checked its position with the flat-eyed assessment she brought to every mechanical problem. "Level." She wrote something in the notebook without comment. "Does it bother you," Soleil said, "when things aren't right and nobody notices?" The question came out slightly more direct than she'd intended. She heard it in the air after she'd said it and felt, briefly, exposed by it. Dani looked at her. The full, patient, problem-solving look. "No," Dani said. "Noticing is the job. I don't need company for it." It was the most she had ever said about herself. All 12 words of it. Soleil received them and put them away and went to get the mop for the floor, because the floor needed doing, and the floor was real, and the floor did not ask her what she was actually thinking about. She mopped in the order Dani had taught her. Far corner to near. She did not think about why 12 words from a woman who barely spoke felt like more information than most people gave her in an hour. She thought about the beans. Tuesday. The inventory notebook, small and spiral-bound. The left hand moving across the page. The Teflon hour ended at 7:45, as it always did, when the kitchen was clean and the work was done and there was no longer a reason to be in the same room. Soleil rinsed the mop and hung it. She was not disappointed about this. She was not. She went to find Priya's office for her Tuesday check-in, and she walked down the beige hallway, and she assembled herself as she walked, and by the time she knocked she was ready, and the version of her that sat down across from Priya was exactly the version that Priya's framework required. It was a good session. Satisfactory. She walked out and stood in the hallway again, in the same spot she always stood, and thought about how the word had stopped feeling like enough. Chapter 7, Behind the Freezer. The noise started on a Wednesday. It was not a dramatic noise. It was not the noise of something failing. Dani had learned the difference between the noise of something failing and the noise of something in the process of failing, and this was the second kind. A faint rhythmic scrape, just below the level of kitchen ambient, that happened at 30-second intervals and then stopped and then happened again. She tracked it for 20 minutes before she located it in the industrial freezer, the big one, on the far wall, which held the bulk dry goods and the frozen proteins and which was technically not her problem in that nobody had asked her to address it. She addressed it after the breakfast line, when the kitchen had gone quiet. The industrial freezer was a commercial chest and upright combination unit, older than anything else in the kitchen, installed at some point in the building's history when the building had housed something other than what it now housed. It ran fine, mostly. The noise was coming from the back, which meant she needed to pull the unit out from the wall to access the compressor housing, which meant she needed to move the thing. She moved the thing. It was heavy and she used the furniture dolly from the supply closet and she did it in increments, walking the unit out at angles the way you moved large objects alone when you had nobody to help you and had stopped expecting help. Ruthie was on her break. Bev was in a meeting. The kitchen was empty. The unit came out from the wall in 3 moves, and Dani went around to the back, and the gap it left between the machine and the wall was about 8 inches of space that nothing had occupied in what looked, from the accumulation of dust on the floor back there, like a very long time. She found the noise. Loose housing bracket on the compressor casing. The vibration of the motor was working the bolt out in micro increments, and in another week it would be loose enough to cause real damage. She found a socket wrench in the maintenance kit under the prep counter, tightened the bolt, ran the unit for 2 minutes to confirm the noise was gone. The noise was gone. She was putting the socket wrench back when she saw the journal. It was in the gap behind the freezer, in the space between the wall and where the unit sat when properly positioned. A composition notebook, the standard kind, black covers, the size of something you'd carry in a school bag. It was wedged back there in the specific way of something that had been deliberately placed rather than accidentally dropped, spine against the wall, cover facing out, in the small dry pocket of space that the unit's base created. It had been there long enough to accumulate its own thin layer of dust on the top cover but not long enough to be warped or damaged. Weeks, probably. Maybe a few months. Dani looked at it for a moment. She reached in and took it. She opened the cover to confirm it wasn't something official, a house form, a staff document, something that needed to go to Bev. There was no name on the cover. On the first inside page, in handwriting that was small and careful and slightly left-leaning, someone had written a date 14 months ago and then, below it, the first line of what appeared to be a journal entry. She read the line to confirm it was a journal and not something that needed to go to Bev. The line was, she does this thing where she makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room. The trick is you're not. She's just afraid of what happens if you look at her instead. Dani stood in the empty kitchen with the journal open in her hand. She read the next line. She told herself she was confirming it was a journal and not something that needed to go to Bev. She read the page. She was at the third page when she understood that she was not confirming anything. She was just reading. She sat down on the floor between the unit and the wall with the journal in her lap, which was not something she had planned, which was not something she had done in a kitchen before, which was the kind of thing that happened when you read something that got in under your defenses before your defenses had time to arrange themselves. The person who had written this was not a skilled writer. That was the first thing. She wrote the way people wrote in private, when the writing wasn't for an audience, short sentences, incomplete thoughts, the kind of syntax that followed feeling rather than grammar. Plain. Specific. Without any of the careful construction that meant someone was thinking about how they would read. And she had been writing about a woman, unnamed throughout, who Dani recognized by the third page with a clarity that was almost physical. The woman in the journal read the room in 3 minutes and knew what everyone needed. She was warm in a way that was real and also managed. She made the writer feel, every time they talked, like the only person in the room, and the writer had figured out, eventually, that this was not about the writer. She exits, the journal said, before you can exit first. I thought at first it was confidence. It's the opposite of confidence. She knows exactly where the door is at all times. Dani sat on the kitchen floor and read about Soleil. Not Soleil by name. But the woman in these pages was Soleil. The light brown eyes that were always slightly warmer than whatever they were actually feeling. The way her composure increased precisely when she was moved. The laugh that came a beat too early. The room reading, the warmth deployed like a tool, the private person, glimpsed once, in a moment the writer described simply as, I asked her something she hadn't prepared for and for about 4 seconds I saw her. I don't know what I saw. But it was real. The writer's name was not in the journal either. There was no name anywhere. But by page 7 there was enough, the Pacific Northwest references, the way she described the inside of this building, a mention of a caseworker meeting, that Dani understood, this woman had been here. At Vantage Point. She had known Soleil here, in this building, and she had written it all down in a notebook and put it behind the industrial freezer, in the gap between the machine and the wall, in the one dry pocket of space in a kitchen that nobody looked behind. She had left it somewhere it might be found, someday, by someone who worked the kitchen closely enough to notice a compressor vibration and trace it to its source. Dani turned the last page at 9:47 p.m. She was in her bunk by then, with the book light she wasn't supposed to be using, which she knew she wasn't supposed to be using and was using anyway. The last entry was dated 8 months ago. It was short. It said, she left last week. No drama, no fight. She just said she thought it was time. I said okay. I didn't say anything else. I don't know if I should have said something else. I know what she was doing. I know she was leaving before I could see the end of her, whatever that means. I wish I'd told her, I don't know. That it wouldn't have ended the way she thought. That I would have stayed. That knowing someone, actually knowing them, doesn't have to mean you have something to use against them. I wouldn't have used it. I wouldn't have. Dani turned off the book light. She lay in the dark and thought about the last line. She thought about what it meant to write I wouldn't have twice, the way you wrote something twice when once didn't feel like enough to make it true in the right direction. She thought about the woman who had written this and left it behind a freezer in a place where she would never return, and what that act meant, not abandonment, not throwing it away, but placing it. Leaving it in the one spot in the building that was only accessible to someone paying very close attention. She had been paying very close attention. She thought about Soleil. She thought about the person she had been watching for 12 days, the person the journal had just given her a name for, a history for, a map of, and she felt, with a clarity she would not have wanted, the specific shape of what she now knew and had not been given permission to know. She put the journal on the floor beside her bunk and stared at the ceiling. She had 18 months of keeping her mouth shut about things that weren't hers to speak. She had a code about information. You didn't use what you hadn't been offered, you didn't turn knowledge into leverage, you kept what you found and you waited to understand what you were supposed to do with it. She was going to put it back. Tomorrow morning, before the shift. She was going to put the journal back behind the freezer, in the gap, in the small dry pocket of space, and she was going to move the unit back into position, and she was going to go to work. She did not know what she was going to do with what she had read. She knew she was not going to pretend she hadn't read it. She knew that the number was now 17 days and that this felt, for the first time in 17 months, like not enough. The ceiling had a water stain in one corner that she had been using as a fixed point when she couldn't sleep. She fixed her eyes on it now and she let the kitchen's quiet settle around her, and she did not think about the 8 months of unanswered I wouldn't haves at the end of a journal she had not been looking for and had found anyway. She thought about her grandmother's kitchen. How her grandmother said that the things that found you were usually the things you'd already been moving toward without knowing it. She did not examine this. She closed her eyes. 17 days. Chapter 8, What Lena Knew. Dani had put the journal back. She'd done it at 5:20 on Thursday morning, before Ruthie arrived, before the fluorescents came on. She'd moved the unit out on the dolly, crouched in the gap, and replaced the notebook in its pocket of space with the same care she'd used when she'd found it, spine against the wall, cover facing out. She'd slid the unit back into position and checked the alignment and gone to start the coffee. She had been thinking about it for 11 days. Not continuously. She had the prep and the line and the cleanup and the chair and the number was now 6 days away from being single digits, and she had the HVAC possibility in Bridgeport that she was still holding at the correct distance, close enough to be real, far enough not to build on. She had all of this. She also had the journal, which she had read once and put back and was not going to read again because she did not need to, because it had gotten in under the defenses the first time with such efficiency that a second reading would have been redundant. It was already inside. She already knew what it said. She thought about it the way she thought about things she couldn't put down, sideways. At the edge of attention. Not looking directly at it. What she kept coming back to was not Soleil. What she kept coming back to was the woman who had written it. She had not known there was going to be a grief for a person she had never met. She had not prepared for that. The writer, she needed a name, her mind kept reaching for one and finding the gap, had been at vantage point, had known Soleil here, had built something with her here in this building in these rooms with this same kitchen at the center of it. And she had written the whole thing down in the plain, unperformed way of someone who had given up on being read and was writing anyway, which was its own kind of courage. And she had left it. Dani had carried people she'd lost before. This was different and she couldn't fully account for why. Maybe because there was no loss event, no fight, no door, no parking lot in the rain. The woman had just written 8 months of love letters to someone who would never read them and tucked them in the safest small space in a kitchen and gone on with her life. Dani hoped she'd gone on with her life. She was fairly sure she had. The last entry had something in it, a quality beneath the grief, that read less like an ending and more like the thing before a beginning. Like someone who had finally said the true thing out loud and now had to figure out what to do with the silence that followed. She thought about the entries. Not in order, they didn't need to be read in order, she'd learned, because the journal wasn't a story with a plot so much as a record of a person paying attention. She thought about specific ones. The one early on, when they'd been maybe 2 months into whatever it was, I keep trying to figure out if she knows she's performing. I think she does and she doesn't. I think the performance started somewhere early enough that it became the load-bearing wall. You can't just take it down. The whole structure goes with it. What I want to tell her, what I never can tell her, is that I see the wall and I see what it's protecting and I want her to know that the thing it's protecting is worth having. That it's enough. That she doesn't have to hold it behind all that scaffolding. And then, in the margin, smaller, I don't think she'd believe me. Dani had read that one twice. She had not meant to read it twice. She had been aware, reading it the second time, of something that was not Soleil she was thinking about. She was thinking about herself at 28, in a different city, in the first year with Greta, when Greta had tried to say something like that and Dani had received it as a threat rather than an offering. Had not heard it right. Had heard it as, I see through you. When the actual sentence had been, I see you. She had not understood, then, the distance between those two things. She understood it now, and the understanding cost something, which was how understanding usually worked. She thought about the one from month 4, she said something today that wasn't curated. I don't think she knew she was doing it. We were washing up after a shift and she was tired, really tired, not the managed version of tired, and she said, I miss having somewhere to be that's mine. Not the right version of mine. Just mine. And then she looked at me like she'd dropped something valuable and was deciding whether to pick it up or act like she hadn't dropped it. I didn't make it a thing. I just said, yeah. Because it was the right answer. Because making it a thing would have closed the door. I'm learning how to be in the room without taking up all the oxygen in it. I didn't know I needed to learn that. That one had stayed with Dani the way a sentence stayed with you when it was also about you, when you read something and felt the specific embarrassment of recognition, the sense of being described by someone who had never met you. She hadn't known she needed to learn that. She was not sure she'd learned it yet. She was learning it. She thought she was learning it. The one from month 6, shorter, she ran the program on me today. I knew what it was. I let her anyway because I like it when she tries, even when it's the program, even when I can feel the machinery of it. I think that makes me an idiot. I also think, I know her well enough now to know that the program is not the opposite of real. It's what she does with real when she doesn't know how else to offer it. So I take it. And I wait. Dani had sat with that for a long time. Not because of what it said about Soleil but because of what it said about the writer, who had looked at someone performing at her and had thought, I know what this is and I'm staying anyway. Who had understood that the performance was not a deception but a language, the only language available, at the time, in that body, for a particular kind of real. She thought about the last entry again. She had not meant to think about it again. I know what she was doing. I know she was leaving before I could see the end of her, whatever that means. I wish I'd told her, I don't know. That it wouldn't have ended the way she thought. That I would have stayed. That knowing someone, actually knowing them, doesn't have to mean you have something to use against them. I wouldn't have used it. I wouldn't have. Dani was mopping the kitchen floor. This was Thursday of her second week since reading, 11 days in. She was mopping in the order she always mopped, far corner to near, and the rhythm of it was the right kind of anchor, the kind that let her mind move without pulling her under. She had not said anything to Soleil. This was the thing she was turning over most carefully. She knew things about Soleil that Soleil had not offered her. She had come by the knowledge honestly, the journal had been there, in a space she was accessing for legitimate maintenance, and she had read it without knowing what it was until it was already too late to not know. She had not sought it out. But she had it. And she was keeping it. She thought about whether keeping it was protection or cowardice. She thought about the writer, who she was beginning, in her mind, to call Lena, for no better reason than that the name fit the handwriting, and what Lena would have wanted from the person who found this thing. Whether there was such a thing as what Lena would have wanted, given that Lena had left the journal in a gap behind a freezer rather than giving it to anyone. The act itself was not, please find this and use it. The act was something else. Something more like, let it exist somewhere. Let it be held by the building, just in case. Just in case someone pays close enough attention. Someone had paid close enough attention. Now the question was what to do with it. She wrung the mop. She thought, I could tell her I found it. She thought, I don't know how to tell her I found it without it becoming the thing she's afraid of. The thing used against her. The knowledge as leverage. She thought, which means I wait. Which meant she had already decided. She moved the mop bucket to the near side of the kitchen and finished the floor, and she did not perform the deciding for anyone, because there was no one in the kitchen but her, and that was fine. That was just fine. She hung up the mop. 6 days now until single digits. The number that had been a subtraction problem was something else. She was not sure what. She pressed it the way you pressed a bruise, not from pleasure, but from needing to know how much it still cost. Quite a bit, was the answer. Quite a bit. She went to find her chair. Chapter 9, Inventory. The Tuesday prep list was longer than the Monday one, which meant more time in the kitchen, which meant more time working adjacent to Soleil, which meant the specific discipline of being in a room with someone you knew too much about while they knew only what they had chosen to give you. Dani had developed a system for this. It was the same system she developed for most things she couldn't put down: break it into components. Identify what was yours to manage and manage it. Identify what wasn't yours and leave it alone. What was hers to manage: the prep, the line, the cleanup, the number. What wasn't hers: the rest of it. The system mostly worked. What it didn't account for was the way a person changed when they were in a kitchen long enough, and the specific way Soleil had been changing, gradually, incrementally, in the direction of less performance and more presence, over the 3 weeks they'd been working together. It was not dramatic. It was the kind of change you only caught because you'd been watching from the start, before the change began, and could therefore see the delta. A before and after that existed only if you had the before. Dani had the before. She watched the after arrive in small pieces. On the Tuesday of week 3, Soleil dropped an opinion. She did not deploy it. She did not offer it with the warmth calibration and the soft landing of her usual social moves. She was stirring the pot of oatmeal, eyes on the burner, the functioning one, the right rear, and she said, with the flat effect of someone reporting information, "The oatmeal's better with salt than sugar." Dani looked up from the eggs. "We have both." "I know. I'm saying it's better. Not asking for permission." A beat. "Okay," Dani said. "Most people do sugar because it's what they're used to. But it needs salt to taste like anything. It just tastes like warm water without it. You going to put it on the board?" Soleil looked at the whiteboard where the breakfast options were listed. She was quiet for a moment in the way that Dani recognized, not composing herself, but actually thinking. "No," she said. "It doesn't matter enough. It might matter to the people eating it." Another beat. Soleil turned to look at her, and the look was the direct one, not the performed one, slightly less warm, slightly more actual. "Are you telling me to put it on the board?" "I'm saying you had an opinion," Dani said. "Seems like it should go somewhere." Soleil stared at her for a moment. Then she picked up the marker and wrote, "Try the oatmeal with salt today," in the small careful script she used for everything. Stood back, looked at it, and went back to the stove. She did not say anything else about it. She did not manage the moment into something. She just let it be what it was and moved on, and there was something in that, in the simplicity of an opinion offered, a mark made, the subject closed, that was more real than anything Soleil had given Dani in 3 weeks. Dani filed it. The inventory she was quietly keeping had nothing to do with the prep list. It had to do with the moments that fell out of the performance when the performance ran low on material. The salt versus sugar. 3 days earlier, a laugh, not the designed one that came half a second too early but an actual laugh, surprised out of her when Ruthie had knocked the biscuit tin off the counter and tried to catch it and failed in a way that was entirely slapstick, and Soleil had laughed with her whole face, briefly and without managing it, and then looked almost startled at herself. Last Thursday, a silence in the cleanup that she had not filled. She'd had material, Dani could see the social gears turning, the search for something to say, and she had found the material and had not used it. She had just stood at the sink and let the silence be silence. That one had cost her something. Dani had watched it happen. She was building a record of small, unperformed things, and she was aware that the record was the thing the journal had given her a language for. Lena had built the same record. Lena had catalogued the moments when the performance ran out and the real person was briefly there, in the gap, before the scaffolding went back up. "I saw her," Lena had written. "For about 4 seconds I saw her." Dani was seeing her for longer than 4 seconds now. The exposure was increasing. Not because she was pressing it, she had made a decision not to press it, to ask nothing and demand nothing and simply be the person in the room who did not require the performance, but because the performance, run against someone who didn't need it, had started to wear thin in places. She thought about whether she was doing something to Soleil by doing this. By refusing to take the version being offered and waiting, patiently, for the version underneath. Whether patience was its own kind of pressure. She did not know. She thought, I have 9 days. And then I am gone, and Soleil is still here, and whatever is happening in this kitchen will be over, and she will find a new kitchen partner and she will run the program and it will work on that person the way it was supposed to work on everyone. She thought, that is the most likely outcome and it is not my business. She thought, okay. She thought, okay. She was at the steam table when Soleil appeared beside her without warning, holding a bowl of oatmeal. She set it on the edge of the table. Woman at the end of the line said it was the best oatmeal she'd had here, Soleil said. She asked if we were doing something different. What did you say? I said we tried something. A pause. She said to keep it. Dani looked at the bowl. The oatmeal was visibly salted, a small pale shimmer on the surface that was the right amount. You going to? Dani said. Soleil considered this with the actual thinking look, not the performance of considering look. Yeah, she said. I think so. She went back to her station. Dani looked at the oatmeal for a moment longer, and then she moved on down the steam table, and she did not make anything of it. The inventory grew. 9 days. Chapter 10, The Thing She Does. Soleil had been running out of material for a week and a half and she knew it and she did not fully understand why it bothered her less than it should have. The material was the system. The system had worked in every room she'd entered for as long as she could reliably remember. You read the room, you identified what the room needed, you provided it. In return you got legibility, you became a person the room recognized and accepted, and you did not have to show up as anything other than what the room required, which meant you did not have to show up as yourself, which was the part she needed. The self was the variable. The performance was the constant. Constants were survivable. With Dani, the material kept running out at around the 40-minute mark of any given shift, and then she was left with the thing that was underneath. Whatever that was. The opinions she hadn't curated. The silences she hadn't filled. The oatmeal salt situation, which she was still thinking about 4 days later in a way that was disproportionate to its actual significance. Somebody had eaten the oatmeal and told her it was better. She had done a real thing and a real thing had come back. This was not a new concept. She understood intellectually that real things and real returns were possible. She had simply not expected the kitchen to be where she found out it was still true. She was at her desk on a Thursday afternoon, her Tuesday check-in behind her and the Thursday phone call 2 hours ahead, and she was supposed to be working on the goal-tracking worksheet that Priya's framework required, a form she had completed 3 times at previous programs and could fill out in her sleep, which was partly the problem. She had it open in front of her. She had written her name and the date and stopped. The question at the top of the first column was, what progress have you made toward your stated goals this week? She had progress. She had concrete, demonstrable, frameable progress. She had her kitchen hours, her check-in attendance, her medication consistency, the 2 phone calls she'd made to people on her support list. She could produce 4 sentences about each of these that would satisfy the framework. She wrote nothing. She sat in the chair at the desk and she looked at the form and she thought about what it would mean to write something true on it. Not untrue true, not false, but the other kind, the kind that didn't translate easily into the framework's language. I have been running out of material in the kitchen and instead of rebuilding the inventory I have been noticing what it's like when it runs out. I have been letting a woman who does not seem to require anything from me watch me in a way nobody has watched me since. She stopped the thought. She had not thought about Lena in weeks. She had been at Vantage Point for exactly 24 days and for most of those days she had been doing the work of not thinking about the person she had left, 8 months ago, in a room in this same building, in the same way she always left people, before they could see the end of her, before the knowing became a weapon. Lena had not been going to use it as a weapon. She knew that. She had known it then, in the way you know the thing you are most afraid of is probably not true, which was insufficient knowledge, which helped nothing. The Thursday phone call was to someone on her support list, a woman from a previous program who had been clean for 2 years and who Soleil genuinely liked in the careful way she liked most people, which was at a comfortable distance. She had been making the call every Thursday because it was on the list. She had been making it because it satisfied the requirement. She had been making it and having a conversation that was real in its component parts and performing recovery at her friend the way she performed it at everyone, and her friend, who was also good at the language of recovery, had been performing back, and they had been having a conversation that was satisfying in the technical sense of the word and hollow in the way that rooms were hollow when both people in them were performing. She had thought about this before. She was thinking about it more since the kitchen. Since Dani. She wrote on the form, "I am becoming aware of the difference between going through the process and being in it." She looked at what she had written. She crossed it out. Then she looked at the cross-out and did not rewrite it with something safer, which was what she normally did. She left the cross-out on the form, which was the kind of evidence she normally didn't leave, and she put the pen down. She thought about Tuesday. The oatmeal. The way Dani had said, "You had an opinion, seems like it should go somewhere." No pressure in it. No warmth deployment. Just a flat acknowledgement that something real was present and had not been given a place to go, and perhaps it deserved one. She thought about the way Dani moved through the kitchen. The economy of it. The absolute absence of any bid for attention, the equipment fixed and not mentioned, the floor mopped in the right order, the prep done and done right, and the satisfaction kept strictly internal, which Soleil could only read because she had been watching closely enough for long enough. She had not meant to start watching closely. She had been watching for threat assessment, which was the mode she used for anyone she was going to be in a room with repeatedly. She had been watching for what Dani wanted from her so she could prepare it and deliver it and keep the balance. Dani did not want anything from her. This had gone from baffling to something else. She was having trouble naming the something else. It was not comfort, it was not comfortable, exactly, to be in a room with someone whose attention she couldn't redirect. It was not safety, she wasn't sure she trusted safety as a concept, had not trusted it since she was old enough to understand that the people who offered it usually had conditions attached. It was more like, she was reaching for the word and kept arriving at the same one, which she kept rejecting, and then arriving at it again. Witnessed. It felt like being witnessed. Not assessed for usefulness, not read for what version of herself to present back, not desired or managed or carefully handled. Just, seen. The way you saw a thing when you weren't trying to do anything with it. She did not know what to do with that. She had spent 34 years being looked at by people who wanted things from the looking. She did not have a framework for the other kind. She folded the goal tracking form in half and put it in the desk drawer. She would fill it out properly tomorrow. She would produce 4 frameable sentences per category and they would be true enough and they would satisfy the framework, and her Tuesday check-in would go the way they went. She picked up the book she'd been reading. It was a novel, something she'd started at Caldwell and hadn't finished, and she read 2 pages and found she couldn't stay in it. Put it down. She looked at the drawer where the goal tracking form was. She thought about what she would write on it if she were writing the version that didn't need to go to Priya. She did not write it. But she thought about it, which was, she suspected, a different thing than she'd been doing before. Not the same as writing it. But different from not thinking it, which was what she'd been doing for most of 34 years, and different meant something, she thought. She thought it meant something. She picked the novel back up. She read 6 pages this time before she put it down, which was progress, of a kind. Chapter 11, Something Real Falls Out. There were 9 days left when Soleil said something she hadn't planned to say. It happened on a Friday, which was a heavier prep day, more volume, more time in the kitchen, more opportunity for the material to run out in ways that hadn't been accounted for. Dani had noticed, over the past 2 weeks, that Fridays were when it happened most. The performance was a finite resource, and a long shift burned through it faster. They were doing the lunch prep. Dani was working the soup, a vegetable base that wanted another 30 minutes before it was ready, and Soleil was doing the bread, which Ruthie had handed off on her way out with the particular authority of someone transferring jurisdiction. "Your hands are better for it," Ruthie had said to Soleil, and walked out before Soleil could decide whether this was a compliment. The kitchen was quiet. Bev had the residents in a house meeting until 11. Through the window, the October sky was doing something gray and particular that was neither threatening nor hopeful, Just weather, moving through. My mother used to make bread, Soleil said. She said it to the dough. Not to Dani. That was the first tell, the direction of it, aimed at the counter rather than calibrated for a listener. Dani adjusted the heat on the soup and did not respond, which was the right thing, and which she had learned was the right thing from somewhere she was not going to name. Not like this. The kind you can't write down a recipe for. She never measured. Everything was the right amount. You'd ask her how much flour and she'd say enough, which wasn't helpful. She pushed the heel of her hand into the dough. She was not a demonstrative person. About most things. But she made bread on Saturdays, when she thought nobody was watching, and I used to sit on the counter when I was small and watch her because it was the one time the whole week she looked like somebody who wasn't performing anything. She stopped. Dani could hear the stop, the moment the sentence caught up to the person saying it and announced itself as something that hadn't been planned. Soleil's hands stilled in the dough. A beat passed. Sorry, she said. That was, I don't know where that came from. Don't apologize, Dani said. To the soup. A silence. Not an empty one. She died 8 months before I came to Caldwell, Soleil said, quieter. I didn't know how to do any of it right. The grieving part. I kept performing that too. I did the right things, I said the right things, I let the right amount of it show and kept the rest managed. And one morning I woke up and she pressed the dough again. I had stopped knowing what it actually felt like. To be sad about it. I'd processed it into something else. Dani turned down the flame on the soup. Not because it needed it. Because her hands needed something to do and that was available. Caldwell, she said. Not a question. Yes. Before here. A pause. The program at Caldwell was good. I did it right. I did the whole thing right and I got a satisfactory and I moved on to the next placement. She said the word satisfactory the way you said a word you'd been carrying in your mouth long enough to know the taste of it. Dani looked at her. Soleil was working the dough again, methodically, and her face had the quality it had when she wasn't managing it for an audience, not raw, exactly, but unpracticed. Like a room with the furniture pushed to the walls. You said she made bread on Saturdays, Dani said. Soleil looked up. When she thought nobody was watching, Dani said. Something moved in Soleil's face. Not much, but something, the recognition of being heard more precisely than expected. Yes, she said. So she knew how to be that person. She just kept it for when she thought she was alone. A long pause. Soleil looked down at the dough. I didn't think about it that way, she said. Doesn't mean it's right, Dani said. Just a read. No. Soleil's voice was quiet. I think it's right. I think she stopped again. I think she was afraid of what happened when people saw the unmanaged version. She'd had something early on that taught her to keep it back. A pause. I don't know why I'm telling you this. You don't have to. I know. Her hands were still in the dough. Not pressing. Just resting. That's why I am. Dani did not look at her again. She looked at the soup, which needed nothing, and she kept looking at it, because the thing about a moment like this was that looking at it too directly was the way to end it, and it did not deserve to be ended. The bread's going to be good, Dani said. A brief exhale from Soleil. Not quite a laugh, but the thing that happened before a laugh when a person was surprised back into their own body by something small and true. It usually is, she said. And the voice that said it was not the performing one. They finished the prep without talking much. The soup was done by 11:15. The bread came out of the oven at 11:50, and Soleil checked the bottom crust with the confidence of someone who had learned it from watching rather than from a recipe, and set it on the rack without comment. When the lunch line opened at noon and a woman at the far end of the table tore off a piece of the bread and closed her eyes for a second, Dani saw Soleil see it. Saw the thing that crossed Soleil's face, quiet, unmanaged, something she hadn't prepared for because she hadn't known to prepare for it. Dani moved on down the line. She thought, 9 days. She thought, it is not enough. She thought, you don't get to want more of this than you're given. She served the soup. The line moved. The thing that had fallen out of Soleil on Friday was still on the floor on Sunday, and she had not picked it up. This was new. The old protocol was, something falls out, you assess it for damage, you determine whether it needs to be recontained or abandoned, you act accordingly. Fast, automatic, nothing left on the floor. She had developed it early and it had cost nothing to run, and she had never examined whether cost was the wrong metric. On Sunday there was no kitchen shift. She had the morning free. Priya's framework offered a list of suggested activities, journaling and the optional group session in the common room at 10. She had attended 2 group sessions so far. Both times, she understood in retrospect, she had gone to perform attendance rather than to be there. She did not go to the group session. She sat at her desk and she thought about Friday. She thought about what had come out of her, and when she tried to do the usual thing, the assessment, the damage report, the recontainment, she found the machinery for it was slower than it had ever been. Like it had been running warm for too long. Dani had not looked at her after it happened. That was the thing Soleil kept returning to. Dani had looked at the soup, and said the thing about the bread, and moved on, and neither the observation about her mother nor the silence that followed had been treated as something requiring management. It had just been allowed to be what it was. Information about a person, offered, received, set down. She had not known, before this kitchen, that being received that way was possible. She opened the desk drawer. Looked at the goal tracking form with the crossed-out sentence. I am becoming aware of the difference between going through the process and being in it. She had crossed it out. She had not thrown the form away. She took out a clean sheet of paper. Not a form. Just paper. She wrote, my mother made bread on Saturdays. She looked at what she had written for a long time. Then she kept going, slowly, with the handbrake still mostly engaged but without performing it for anyone. She wrote about Saturdays. She wrote about the kitchen on Saturdays, the particular smell of it, the way her mother's shoulders changed when she thought the room was empty. She wrote about the funeral, the way she had conducted herself through it, the way people had said you're so composed, and she had accepted this as a compliment. It had not occurred to her until much later that what they were seeing was not composure but absence. She wrote a paragraph about Caldwell. She crossed most of it out. She wrote, there is a woman in this kitchen who doesn't seem to need anything from me. I don't know what to do with that. I've been trying to figure out if it should feel like rejection and it doesn't. I can't work out why it doesn't. I think it might be because she looks at me like I'm something worth waiting for. Nobody has looked at me that way in. She stopped. She looked at the sentence. She thought about what came next. She thought about how long ago. She thought about a name she had not allowed herself to think directly since arriving at Vantage Point. She didn't write it. But she let herself think it. Just once, quietly, sitting at the desk with the paper in front of her. Lena. She sat with it for a moment. The building did not fall in. She was still in the chair, still at the desk, still the person who had walked in 26 days ago with her bags and her intake performance and her satisfactory assessment. She folded the paper and put it in the desk drawer, behind the form with the crossed-out line. She closed the drawer. She thought, something has to change. She did not know yet what she was going to do with that thought. But she held it without immediately putting it down, which was different from what she usually did, and different was not nothing. Chapter 12, The Ruthie Conversation. Dani was wringing the mop when Ruthie came back in. She had thought the kitchen was empty, Soleil had gone, Bev had passed through and left, the breakfast cleanup was nearly done. It was 8:20 in the morning and there were 8 days left and Dani was at the sink with the mop and the particular quality of silence she had learned to recognize as hers, the kind that settled in after the work had cleared the room of everything else. Ruthie came in from the back hallway and pulled the door shut behind her and did not say anything for a moment. She looked at Dani. Then she looked at the far wall, at the industrial freezer sitting against it in its usual position. Then she looked back at Dani. You found something behind that freezer, she said. Not a question. Dani kept ringing the mop. Maintenance call. I know what it was. Ruthie moved to the counter and set down the cup she was carrying. The compressor bracket. You fixed it. I heard you doing it, 2 weeks ago Wednesday. A pause. I heard you go back there again. The gap behind the unit. Dani said nothing. You read it, Ruthie said. Still not a question. The mop was wrung. Dani held it and did not move to the bucket. You knew it was there, she said. Ruthie was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice had the quality it had when she was being careful, not hedging, just precise. I knew there was a notebook back there. I didn't read it. It wasn't mine to read. She picked up her cup. Different situation, you doing maintenance on the unit. I could have put it in lost and found. You could have. Dani looked at her. Lena put it there, Ruthie said. That's the woman's name. Lena Parrish. She was here, let's see. She left about 8 months before you transferred in. Started maybe a year before that. She and Soleil were on the same kitchen shift. Dani was still holding the mop. She put it in the bucket. You knew her, she said. I know people who come through here, Ruthie said. I've been here long enough to know a lot of people. Lena I liked. She was honest in a way that wasn't a performance of honesty, if you understand what I mean. She saw things right and she said them right, and she was one of the people I thought about after she left. She drank her coffee. I thought about her because of the other thing. Soleil. Yes. The kitchen held them for a moment. Outside, somewhere, a truck was backing up, the intermittent warning note of it, mechanical and indifferent. She left this place in good shape, Ruthie said. Lena. Did the work the right way. Not the way that looks like the work from the outside, the actual thing. She went to her sister's place in Portland after, last I heard. Got a job at a nonprofit, I think. She's doing all right. A pause. You're not going to ask how I know. I assumed you just know, Dani said. Ruthie made a sound that was not quite a laugh. I have a system, she said. People come through here and they matter, and the system doesn't keep track of them for you, so I keep track of them myself. She looked at the far wall again, at the freezer. I didn't tell her to put the notebook there. She just did. I figured it was her way of leaving something behind. Having a place where it existed. Dani thought about the act. The specific, considered act of placing it, spine against the wall, in the dry pocket, in the one space in the building accessible only to someone doing close work. Did she know Soleil would still be here, she said. When she left it. Soleil had more time, Ruthie said. Lena knew that. She looked at Dani directly now, the full, deliberate attention she used when she had arrived at the point she'd been building toward. You know what happened to that woman? She healed. She did the work, the real work, not the version that gets you a satisfactory, and she left this place, and she healed. She's got a life now that's hers. A pause. And Soleil still doesn't know anybody loved her that clean. The words landed and stayed. Dani thought about the last entry. I wouldn't have used it. I wouldn't have. She thought about the 2 lines of it and what it meant to write a thing twice, the way you wrote something twice when once didn't feel like enough to make it true in the right direction. I'm not going to tell her, Dani said. I know. Not because I'm trying to protect something. Because it's not mine to say. She gets to find it or not find it. She gets to know or not know. I'm not, she stopped. Started again. I'm not going to be the person who hands her somebody else's love as a strategy. Ruthie looked at her for a long moment. There was something in the look that was not quite approval. Ruthie's approval was a quieter thing than that, earned over more time. It was more like recognition. The look of someone seeing a thing they had hoped to see and not letting themselves celebrate it prematurely. No, she said. You're not. A pause. But you've got 8 days. And silence is a choice too. I know. I'm not saying tell her about the notebook. That's a separate thing, and I'll leave it separate. She picked up her cup again. I'm saying, the waiting is good. The patience is good. But waiting without saying anything is just another kind of hiding. At some point you have to let her know there's a person in the room. Dani thought about this. She thought about the last 2 weeks, the inventory she had quietly been keeping, the small unperformed things she had been receiving and not naming. The oatmeal. The bread. The thing about Soleil's mother on Friday, which had come out of her like something that had been waiting for a space with enough room. She knows there's a person in the room, Dani said. Does she know the person sees her? Dani didn't answer. Ruthie drank her coffee, unhurried, and let the silence do its work. I'm not telling you what to do, she said, eventually. I'm 52 years old and I have been in and out of rooms like this one for 30 of them, and I have watched a lot of people figure out what it costs to be honest with another person. I have watched some of them figure it out in time, and some of them figure it out too late, and some of them never figure it out at all. She set the cup on the counter. You're not the third kind. Neither is she. She moved toward the door. Ruthie, Dani said. Ruthie stopped. Why did she put it behind the freezer specifically? A pause. Ruthie turned back, just slightly. What do you mean? She could have taken it with her. Destroyed it. Given it to you. Dani was thinking about the deliberateness of it, the specific care of the act. She put it in the one place in the building that someone had to be paying real attention to find. Ruthie looked at her. Yes, she said. She did. She went out. Dani stood in the empty kitchen for a moment. The truck outside had stopped its warning. The freezer sat against the wall in its usual position, solid and unremarkable, holding the bulk dry goods and the frozen proteins, and, behind it, in the gap, in the small dry pocket of space, a notebook that a woman had placed there with the care of someone who had decided that some things deserved to be held somewhere, even if no one was coming back for them. Someone had come back for it. Not Lena. But someone. 8 days. Dani picked up the mop bucket and carried it to the utility sink and did not think about what she was going to say or when or how. She thought about the soup that needed to be started for lunch. She thought about the prep list. She thought about the left front burner, which had been running reliably for 3 days now and which she was cautiously prepared to trust. She washed her hands. The hot water, for once, came through quickly. Chapter 13, The Priya Problem. The mid-program review was scheduled for a Tuesday. She did not think of it as prepare, she thought of it as getting ready, which was a different word for the same thing but felt less like something she was doing to someone and more like something she was doing for herself. The distinction was increasingly important to her in a way she could not have explained cleanly. The distinction was increasingly important to her in a way she could not have explained cleanly, though she had been turning it over for days, the difference between performance delivered to an audience and preparation you owed yourself. Whether those were really different. Whether she had ever known them to be. Priya Nath had sent the meeting request through the house's internal message board with a note attached, mid-program review, standard at the 6-week mark, an opportunity to assess progress and adjust goals if needed. Soleil had read it the way she read everything from Priya, looking for the subtext beneath the framework language, the thing the institution needed from her beyond the words of the form. The thing it needed was demonstration of progress. Not change. Change was too hard to quantify, too subject to interpretation, too risky as a metric when the person being measured had any agency over what they showed. Progress was quantifiable. Progress had indicators. Soleil knew the indicators and she knew which ones she had satisfied and she knew how to present them in the order and language that would produce, at the end of the session, the word satisfactory in a file. She had this ready by Friday. What she did not have ready was the thing Dani had said to her in the kitchen, which was still sitting in her chest cavity in the way of something that had gotten in and was taking up space she hadn't allocated for it. She is becoming aware, Soleil had written in her desk drawer, of the difference between going through the process and being in it. She had crossed it out. But she remembered it. Sunday she ran the session in her head. The full thing: entry, rapport establishment, first question, pivot to goals. She knew Priya's interview style by now: the pointed follow-up, the deliberate pause that invited elaboration, the way she set her pen down when she was transitioning from form completion to actual conversation. Soleil had mapped these and could navigate them. She ran through her answers. Housing plan, the contact she had in Bridgeport, the 2 leads she'd followed up on. True, both. Employment, the inquiry she'd sent to the nonprofit where she'd volunteered before Caldwell, the one that had not yet replied but which she could describe in terms of active effort. True, if not complete. Support network, the Thursday phone call, the 2 messages she'd sent to people on her list. All true. And then the question Priya always asked at the mid-program mark, the one that came after the form and before the close: how are you experiencing the program? Not what progress have you made, that was the form's language. This was personal. This was, what's it like to be you, right now, in here? Soleil had answered this question 3 times across 3 different programs. She had given, each time, a version that was true in its emotional vocabulary and carefully shaped in its trajectory, the right arc of difficulty into insight, the right calibration of vulnerability, the right landing on something that sounded like growth without overclaiming arrival. She had given it well, and she had meant it in the way she meant most of what she said, which was, the feelings were real but the selection of them was deliberate. She sat at her desk on Sunday and she thought about what the true answer was. The true answer was, I have been running out of material in the kitchen for a month and I don't know what's underneath, and I'm beginning to think that the not knowing is the thing I've been most afraid of my entire adult life. The true answer was, there is a woman who fixes things and doesn't mention it, and she makes me feel like a room with the furniture pushed to the walls, and I don't know if that's safe, but it might be real, and I have not been able to tell the difference between those 2 things for so long that the possibility of real, without safe, is the most disorienting thing that has happened to me here. The true answer was, I wrote my mother's name on a piece of paper yesterday and I cried for about 4 minutes and then stopped, and it was the most honest grief I've had since she died, and I don't know how to tell Priya that what changed was a bread shift and a woman who looks at me like I'm worth waiting for. She would not give Priya the true answer. Not because she didn't trust Priya. Priya was good at her job, which was a separate thing from being a safe audience, and Soleil had learned enough programs to know the difference between a caseworker and a confessor. But she thought, for the first time across all of them, about what it might mean to give the true answer to someone. Not perform the true answer. Not select from the true answer. Just say the thing. She thought about this for a long time on Sunday. She thought about it and she did not resolve it, and she put herself to bed with the review ahead of her and the unresolved thing sitting on the desk in the drawer behind the folded paper and the form with the crossed out line. Tuesday came. She put on the version of herself that was appropriate for a mid-program review at 6:45 in the morning, which meant she was assembled before the kitchen shift, which meant, standing in the bathroom with her hands on the sink, she understood that she had been putting on the version before the shift. For Priya. She was going to perform for Priya and then go to the kitchen and be seen clearly by Dani, and these 2 things had started to feel like moving between languages. The performance and the other thing. She was in the kitchen by 5:50. Dani was already at the range, the east window behind her doing its early morning thing, not gold yet, just the suggestion of it, the light working its way toward color. Good morning, Soleil said. Morning, Dani said. The shift was a Tuesday, which meant the longer prep. They worked through it the way they worked through most things now. The silences were different from the early silences, less a performance of patience and more an actual ease, the kind that had developed without being negotiated. Soleil did the bread again. Dani did the eggs on the reliable rear burners. Ruthie came in at 6 and took her biscuit station with the air of someone for whom the biscuit station was a small country she had governed for years. At 7:10, Soleil said, I have the mid-program review this morning. Bev told me, Dani said. I'll cover the cleanup. You don't have to. I know. She said it the same way she said most things, without warmth performance, without the need for it to be received in any particular way. She would cover the cleanup because it needed covering and Soleil had the review. That was the whole of it. Soleil had stopped finding this baffling somewhere around the 3rd week and had started, in a way she was still cautious about, to find it restful. Thank you, she said. Dani nodded at the steam table. Lines in 5. The review was at 9. She walked into Priya's office with the presentation ready and she delivered it well. She always delivered it well, and Priya listened and asked the pointed follow-up questions and set her pen down at the 12-minute mark, which meant they were transitioning from form to conversation. How are you experiencing the program? Priya asked. Soleil looked at her. She had the prepared answer ready. She knew its weight and its shape and she had tested its edges the way Dani had once described testing the word fine, pressing on them to see if they held. They held. It was a good answer. It was the right answer for this room. She opened her mouth to give it. And did not. What she gave instead was not the true answer either. It was something between, less curated than what she'd prepared, less complete than what she'd written in the drawer. She said, I think I've been doing this a long time and I'm starting to notice how much energy it takes. The doing it right part. A pause. I'm starting to wonder if doing it right and actually doing it are the same thing. Priya looked at her. The pen was still down. What does actually doing it look like? She asked. Soleil thought about the kitchen. About the bread on Friday, the thing that had come out of her before she'd had time to manage it. About a woman who adjusted the soup heat and said the bread's going to be good and moved on without making anything of it. I don't know yet, she said. I'm trying to figure that out. Priya wrote something. That's an honest answer, she said. It landed differently than Soleil expected. She had expected the clinical acknowledgement, the professional warmth receipt of an appropriately vulnerable statement. Instead, Priya's voice had the quality of someone slightly surprised, as if she had been waiting for something and had just seen it arrive. That's a more honest answer than I usually get at the 6-week mark, Priya said. For what it's worth. Soleil didn't know what to say to that. She said nothing, which was unusual for her and which she only registered after the fact. Priya marked the file. Soleil caught the word in her peripheral vision before she could stop herself, satisfactory. Something moved in her chest. Not anger, not quite. Something smaller and more specific. The recognition that the file had said satisfactory when she had just given Priya the least performed version of herself she had ever given a caseworker, and the category was the same. The category was always the same. She shook Priya's hand. Thanked her with the correct calibration of warmth. Walked out into the beige hallway. She was at the end of the hallway, past Bev's office, headed toward the stairs, when she heard footsteps from the kitchen. Dani was coming through the side corridor, carrying the empty bus tray from the cleanup, and she looked up when she saw Soleil and stopped. She looked at her. Not the performing attention look. Not a question. Just the clear, steady quality of attention that had been landing on Soleil for 4 weeks now, like pressure, like something being held against the skin without force, just presence. I see what that cost you, the look said. Not the review, the file. The word. The insufficient word. Soleil did not know how she knew that was what the look said. She knew. Something cracked. Tiny and internal and not visible, but it cracked, the way the surface of ice cracked when the weight on it finally exceeded the holding point, and the crack was not the whole thing giving way but the announcement that the whole thing was no longer solid. Don't, she said. Dani tilted her head. Don't look at me like that right now, Soleil said. Her voice was even. She had trained it to be even, it was always even. I just came out of a session where I said something true and the file still said satisfactory and I don't want, she stopped. I just need a minute. She walked past Dani. She made it to the bathroom on the 2nd floor. She ran the faucet. She stood at the sink and let the water run, and she did not look at herself in the mirror because she had learned, a long time ago, that looking at herself during a functional moment was the way to convert it into something that required managing. She stood there until it was over. 4 minutes. Maybe 5. She dried her hands. She arranged herself, not fully, not back to the morning's precision, but enough to move through the building. She looked at herself in the mirror only after. The face that looked back was not composed. It was also not falling apart. It was something else, some third thing she did not have a name for. She went downstairs. The kitchen was empty, the cleanup done, the surfaces clean. The bus tray was stacked where it belonged. Through the pass-through window she could see the dining room, also empty and clean. On the prep counter, in the center of the cutting board where she would see it immediately, was a cup of coffee. Hot, she could see the steam. The timing of it, the placement of it, so precise and unannounced that it could only have been deliberate. No note. Nothing required in return. She stood at the counter and drank the coffee. It was the right temperature. Chapter 14, Controlled Environment. The argument happened 3 days after the review. Dani had not been looking for it. She did not, generally, look for arguments. She had spent most of her adult life developing the capacity to be the person who did not escalate, who absorbed, who went still when the temperature in a room went up. This was not a moral position. It was a system she had built because the alternative was expensive and because she had learned, by 22, that her body had opinions about certain things that it would express with the kind of force that had consequences. It was Thursday morning. 3 days left. The breakfast line was done and the cleanup was underway, and they were in the middle of a reasonable morning, not easy, not difficult, the ordinary texture of kitchen work in the kind of hour that had its own momentum. She did not know what she did. Something small, she said something about the way Soleil had arranged the pans on the rack, not correcting it, just noting it, the way she noted most things. She said it the way she said most things, flat, informational, not a reproach. Soleil stiffened. It was small and Dani caught it and did not push on it, which was the right move, and for a moment she thought the moment had passed. They kept working. Soleil racked the pans without responding. Dani moved to the floor. Then Soleil said, "I've been stacking pans for 12 years. I know," Dani said. "So you don't need to tell me how to stack them." "I wasn't telling you how to stack them." That's what it sounded like. Dani kept mopping. "I said the drainage angle. Left side is lower. The water pools. I can see where the water pools. Then adjust it." Soleil made a sound. Short, controlled. The kind of sound that had a lot of pressure behind it and was letting only a precise amount through. "You know," she said, "it would be fine if you just said it. Instead of doing this." She gestured, a small, tight motion. "This whole, observational thing. Where you notice everything and you say it in that voice like you're narrating a problem rather than actually talking to me." Dani stopped mopping. She turned around. Soleil was at the rack, still, but she was not looking at the rack. She was looking at Dani, and her face was doing something Dani had not seen it do, not the performance and not the in-between state and not the brief, unmanaged moments the kitchen had been producing. Something more direct than any of those. Something that had cleared the machinery entirely, at least for now, and was just, present. Frustrated. Actually there. "You've been watching me for a month," Soleil said. Her voice was even, but there was something underneath the evenness, the thing that had cracked in the hallway 3 days ago and had not, apparently, reassembled fully. "You watch everything I do and you say the minimum possible and I can't." She stopped. Pressed on. "I can't tell if you're studying me or if you're waiting for something or if this is just how you are with everyone, and I'm aware that I'm the one who made it a rule not to talk about any of it, so I'm not saying this is your fault, I'm just..." She stopped. "What are you actually waiting for?" she said. "Say it." Dani held the mop. She thought about several things very quickly. She thought about the notebook behind the freezer and whether this was the place to say it, and decided it wasn't. She thought about Ruthie's voice. Waiting without saying anything is just another kind of hiding. She thought about the last few days, the dwindling number, what she was going to do with the fact that she had 3 days left and had spent them being patient, and that patience, it turned out, was its own kind of pressure she had not accounted for. "I'm waiting for you to decide," she said. Soleil stared at her. "Decide what?" "Whether you're going to keep running the program on me," Dani said. "Or whether you're going to stop." She kept her voice the same, flat, informational, not a weapon. You've been doing both at the same time for a month and I think that's costing you something. I don't need you to choose on my account. But I think you need to choose on yours. Silence. The fluorescence hummed. Outside, somewhere, a car was in the parking lot with its engine running. The program, Soleil said. Her voice had gone precise the way her voice went when she was managing something real. The sharpness of it was itself a tell, the glass surface that appeared exactly when something underneath was hot. You've been aware of it this whole time. From the first morning. And you didn't say anything. Not my call. Not your call, Soleil repeated. Something moved in her face, not the crack from Tuesday, something sharper and more volatile. You've been watching me perform a version of myself at you for a month and you've just been, waiting. And not saying anything. And watching. Yes. She stopped. Started again. That's not nothing, Dani. That's not a neutral thing. She picked up the dish towel and put it down. Do you understand how it feels to find out someone has been watching you perform and not said anything? Dani thought about this with the honesty it deserved. No, she said. Not from your end. A pause. But I think if I'd said it earlier, you'd have built a better performance. And I didn't want to watch you do that. The air in the kitchen went very still. Soleil looked at her for a long moment. The sharpness in her face had shifted, not gone, but changed quality. Something moving underneath it, turning over. I have to go, she said. She walked out. Dani stood at the center of the kitchen with the mop in her hands. She pressed the edges of what had just happened and found, surprisingly, that she did not regret it. It had cost something. It had been real. Those were the same thing, sometimes, and she had stopped confusing them years ago. She finished the floor. She did it in the right order. Far corner to near. Soleil composed herself on the second floor landing, which was the place in the building she had identified early on as the most reliably empty mid-morning. She stood at the small window that looked out over the parking lot and she breathed. The argument had not been an argument. That was the thing. She had come at Dani with the temperature up and Dani had stood there and not moved and had said the thing that was true, and the thing that was true was not a weapon and was not an accusation and was not what she had been braced for. You've been doing both at the same time and I think that's costing you something. She had been doing both at the same time. She knew this. She had been running out of material and simultaneously rebuilding inventory, a smaller, quieter version, one she thought Dani wasn't noticing. She had been telling herself she was managing the transition from performed to something else, which was true, and also that the transition was on her timeline and on her terms. Which was less true. Which was the lie that her behavior told even when she wasn't the one saying it. Dani had not said, stop performing. She had said, decide. That was a different sentence. It didn't require her to stop anything. It didn't require her to dismantle what had kept her operational for 3 decades. It just required her to know what she was doing and to own the knowing. She stood at the window. She thought about Tuesday. The bathroom, the faucet, the thing that had cracked. She thought about the coffee on the cutting board afterward, with no note and no expectation attached. She thought about the pan argument, which was not about the pans. She thought about a woman who watched without agenda and said what was true and then stood there and waited and did not retreat when Soleil pushed back. She did not go back to the kitchen. She went to her room instead. She sat at the desk. She opened the drawer and looked at the folded piece of paper and the form with the crossed out line. She picked up a pen. She wrote, I don't know how to tell the difference between letting someone in and losing something I need. I have been treating them like the same thing for so long I can't find the seam. She put the pen down. She sat with it. 5 minutes. 10. The sounds of the house around her, someone on the stairs, someone's door, the faint rhythm of a life being lived in proximity. The ordinary proof that other people were also here, also navigating, also doing the work in whatever imperfect way was available to them. She folded the paper back up and put it in the drawer. She did not go back to the kitchen that morning. But she did not request a shift change either. Both of these were choices. She was beginning, slowly, expensively, to understand that most things were. Chapter 15, The Exit. The cleaning crew came on the second Saturday of every month and moved the heavy equipment. Soleil had not known this. She had been at Vantage Point for 32 days and the second Saturday had not yet arrived, so nobody had told her, and there was no reason she would have thought to ask. She found out the way she found out most things she hadn't been looking for, by being present when the thing happened. She was in the kitchen alone at 7:15 in the morning. Dani had the morning off, one of the structured personal days the house provided, which Dani took without explanation, which was how Dani did most things. Ruthie had called out with something respiratory. Soleil was covering the breakfast prep herself, which was more work than two people but manageable, and she had been managing it. The cleaning crew was a 3-person team from a service the house contracted. They came in with mops and industrial cleaning solution and the particular efficiency of people who had cleaned this building many times and knew its geography better than most of the residents. The supervisor, a compact woman named Jeanne, knocked on the kitchen door at 7:20 and said they needed to move the units along the far wall for the quarterly deep clean. Soleil said fine. She said she would stay out of their way. She was at the prep counter doing the egg presets when she heard the sound of the industrial freezer being rolled out from the wall. She did not look up. She was counting the presets, which required attention, and the cleaning crew was doing their job, and it was not interesting. She kept counting. And then Jan said, to her colleague, in a voice that was not directed at Soleil, "Somebody's notebook back here. The black one. You want it or should I leave it?" The colleague said leave it. Jan left it. Soleil's hand stopped. She kept them still for a moment. She finished the count in her head, 14, 15, done. She put the tray on the counter. She did not look at the wall. The cleaning crew moved on to the next unit. She looked at the wall. The freezer was out from its position by about 2 feet, which meant the gap behind it was visible, the pocket of space between the unit's base and the wall. And in the pocket, exactly as Jan had described, was a composition notebook. Black covers. Standard size. Spine against the wall. Soleil looked at it. She thought about Dani, who did the maintenance on this unit. Who had fixed the compressor bracket 3 weeks ago, which had required pulling the unit out from the wall. Who had been in this gap. She thought about a woman who did not use things she found. She thought, no. She thought it clearly and with full knowledge of what she was thinking, which was, Dani was in this gap, and Dani found this, and Dani reads, and this is a notebook, and Dani has been. She walked to the far wall. She crouched down. She picked up the notebook. The dust on the cover, recent disturbance. Not recent as in today. Recent as in weeks ago, when something had been lifted from this spot and replaced. She could see it, the way the dust had resettled unevenly, the ring of a slightly different texture at the edges. She opened the cover. Handwriting. Small, careful, slightly left-leaning. She did not recognize the handwriting. She read the date at the top of the first page, 14 months ago. She read the first line. She had the specific, physical experience of the floor dropping away under her, not dramatic, not a stagger, just the internal sensation of ground being removed while the body stayed still. She knew what this was. She knew whose handwriting this was not, but she knew who it was about. She had read 3 lines and she already knew who it was about and she understood, with a clarity that felt like falling, that she had been known. Had been described. Had been written about in this plain, unadorned, unperformed way by a person whose handwriting she recognized not from previous sight but from the quality of it, the way it moved, the way it stopped. She closed the notebook. She stood up. She put the notebook back in the gap, spine against the wall. She walked back to the prep counter. The cleaning crew was moving the second unit. Through the kitchen window the Saturday morning was doing something bland and overcast, which was just weather, which was not meaningful, which she noted without attaching anything to it because she was in the process of keeping herself extremely still. She finished the egg presets. She started the oatmeal. She ran the breakfast line alone with the competence she had spent her whole life building, and she was warm to the residents in the line, and she learned 2 names she hadn't known, and she kept the steam table full, and she did not think about the notebook. She thought about the notebook the entire time. That afternoon she lay in her bunk and stared at the ceiling. She did the math. Dani had fixed the compressor bracket 3 weeks ago. Dani had been in the gap. Dani had found it. Read it, maybe. Maybe not. Maybe she'd seen it was a personal journal and left it immediately, hadn't looked. Dani read books. Dani read labor history with the book face in so nobody asked about it. Dani was the kind of person who paid attention to everything and did not perform the paying attention. She had read it. Soleil stared at the ceiling. The tile above her had a small water stain in one corner, a brown ring the size of a fist, old damage that had been repaired but left its mark. She had been staring at it for 32 nights. She stared at it now. Dani had read it. Had read whatever was in it. She had seen the handwriting, which Soleil had not recognized, but which was, it was from here. From vantage point. Someone who had been on a kitchen shift, who had known her. She pressed the corners of this. There was one person she had known in this kitchen in this building who would have written like that. Plain. Without a performance. The most honest person Soleil had ever let close, which was the reason she had left before it finished. Before the knowing became something that could be used. Dani had read Lena's journal. Soleil breathed in. Breathed out. She thought about the past 5 weeks. She ran them backward, the patience, the quiet, the consistent refusal to need anything from Soleil that Soleil wasn't offering. The way Dani had returned her deflections. The way she had never pressed a bruise but had also never let her pretend the bruise wasn't there. The coffee on the cutting board after the review. The way she had said, "I didn't want to watch you build a better performance." She had known. The whole time. She had been reading Soleil from a map drawn by someone who had loved her. And she had said nothing. And she had stayed. This felt, lying in the bunk in the gray afternoon light, like the most terrifying thing that had ever happened to her. Not because Dani had used it. She had not used it. There was no version of the past 5 weeks that looked like someone using knowledge as leverage. She understood leverage and she understood the shape of it, and this was not that. This was the opposite. This was someone who had information and had chosen, deliberately, to hold it still while they waited for her to say the things herself. This felt terrifying because she did not know what to do with someone who stayed when they had every reason not to. She had always found the reason. Lena had stayed and she had left first, before Lena's staying could become the thing it threatened to become, which was, real, and requiring of something, and possible to lose. She had exited clean. No fight, no drama. She had announced it was time to go, and she had been so composed about it that she suspected Lena hadn't understood. She was devastated until the door closed. She lay in the bunk. She thought about the journal. About Lena, who had written it, who had described her with the plain, specific accuracy of someone who had given up on performing even for themselves, who had written, "I wouldn't have used it twice," as if once was insufficient proof. She thought about Dani reading it. She thought about Dani knowing and staying. She did not know what to do with the staying. She had no framework for it. She had operated for so long on the assumption that being fully known was the thing that ended things, that the performance was what was lovable, that the real version of herself was insufficient, that letting someone see the machinery was the guarantee of their exit, and the assumption had been confirmed so many times by her own choices that she had stopped questioning whether the confirmation was the evidence or the cause. She lay very still. The bunk above her was empty. The ceiling tile had its water stain. From down the hall she could hear the murmur of a television, someone's door, the ordinary sounds of people getting through a Saturday. She thought, she is still here. She thought, she leaves tomorrow. She thought, I have been doing this wrong. She did not move. She stayed in the bunk until the light in the room changed and the afternoon went gray-blue toward evening, and she lay there and let the knowing be what it was, not filed, not processed, not managed into something that fit a framework. Just present. Uncomfortable. Real. She did not request a kitchen transfer. She thought about requesting one, and she let herself sit with the wanting of it, the clean exit, the removed stimulus, the restoration of a controlled environment, and she understood, for the first time in a long time, that the wanting of it was the old mechanism and that the old mechanism was not going to serve her here. She did not request the transfer. She turned over in the bunk. She thought about what Lena had written, the part she'd read in those 2 minutes in the kitchen, crouched at the far wall. She had only read the first 3 lines. 3 lines, and she had closed it. But the handwriting had been so plain, so specific, so utterly without performance, that even 3 lines had been enough to know it was the most honest thing anyone had ever written about her. She thought, Dani read the whole thing. She thought, and she is still here. She thought, I don't know what that means. She thought, I think I have to find out. Chapter 16, What Lena Wrote. She was in the kitchen at 4:50 in the morning. This was not a shift day. Sunday was a light-duty morning. Ruthie handled the breakfast on Sundays, a reduced service, and Soleil was not scheduled until Monday. But she had lain in the bunk from Saturday night into Sunday morning and had reached a point somewhere around 4:30 where lying there was no longer an option her body was willing to sustain, and so she had gotten up, and she had gotten dressed, and she had come down to the kitchen because the kitchen was the only place in the building that had ever made any sense to her. She moved through the dark with the light from the exit sign at the end of the hall, the same red light that bled into the kitchen at the end of a shift, the color she had come to associate with days ending. She pushed through the kitchen door and stood in the dark for a moment without turning anything on. The kitchen was quiet in a way kitchens were never quiet during operating hours. Just the refrigerator hum, the distant traffic, the ordinary sounds of the building at rest. She stood and let her eyes adjust, and she did not think about what she was going to do, because she already knew. She had known since yesterday afternoon in the bunk. She crossed to the far wall. She crouched. She reached into the gap behind the industrial freezer, and her hand found the notebook in its pocket of space, spine against the wall, cover facing out, in exactly the place she'd returned it yesterday morning. She took it out. She stood up. She carried it to the prep counter and she turned on the one light she could justify, the small work lamp over the counter, the one Bev used when she was doing the early supply check before anyone else arrived. It threw a circle of yellow light over the cutting board and the counter and nothing else. The rest of the kitchen stayed dark. She opened the notebook to the first page. She had read 3 lines yesterday before she had closed it. She understood, now, that closing it had not been protection. It had been the old mechanism, the one that said if you don't finish knowing then you still have the option of not having known. It had never been true. The knowing had already happened. 3 lines had been enough, because what the 3 lines told her was not the specific content but the quality of it. Someone had looked at her clearly and written down what they saw without needing it to be anything other than what it was. She had spent the afternoon with the quality of that looking. She did not need to know the specifics. But she also understood, lying in the bunk while the gray-blue afternoon darkened to evening, that she had been reading around the edges of her own life for a very long time, and that Dani had read the whole thing, and that there was something important in the difference. She started from the beginning. The first entry was dated 14 months ago. Lena's voice, and she knew it was Lena now, had known since she closed the notebook yesterday, had let herself know, was exactly as she remembered it. Unhurried. Without performance. The specific quality of a person writing for no audience, which made it the most honest thing she had ever been given. She does this thing where she makes you feel like the most interesting person in the room. The trick is you're not. She's just afraid of what happens if you look at her instead. Soleil read this and put her hand flat on the counter for a moment, the way you put your hand down when you needed to establish that there was still a surface beneath you. She kept reading. The early entries were from the first weeks, Lena learning the kitchen, learning the rhythms of the place, learning Soleil the way you learned someone before you had language for what the learning was. Lena wrote the way she'd always talked, short sentences, specific details, the kind of observation that didn't try to be more than what it was. She had noticed the half-second early smile in week 2. She had noticed the way Soleil's composure increased when something was real in week 3, and written it down with the plainness of someone naming a weather pattern rather than a flaw. She gets more polished when she's moved. I thought for a while it was a defense mechanism. I think it's older than that. I think it's the thing she built when she was small and the real feelings weren't safe to have out loud. Soleil had to stop at this one. Not long. A minute, maybe. She pressed the edge of the counter and breathed and went on. The middle entries covered the months when whatever it was between them had been at its fullest. Lena wrote about the kitchen with the love of someone who had found a place that made sense to her, the same way Soleil recognized herself finding the kitchen now, the way it demanded the real thing and refused the performance, the way it gave you something honest to do with your hands when the rest of you was navigating something harder. She wrote about the shifts they'd worked together and the things that had fallen out of Soleil during them, the real laugh, the unprepared opinions, the silences she hadn't filled. 2 months in, Lena wrote, she said something today that she hadn't planned to say. I could tell she hadn't planned it by the way she went quiet right after, the way someone goes quiet when they've dropped something and are deciding whether to pick it up. She said she missed having somewhere that was hers. Not the right version of hers. Just hers. I said yeah. That was the right answer. I have been learning how to be in the room without taking up all the oxygen. I didn't know I needed to learn this. Soleil read that paragraph twice. She remembered the shift. She remembered the specific quality of what had come out of her that day, not planned, not curated, just the truth of a particular exhaustion arriving in the form of language. She remembered looking at Lena afterward with the vertigo of exposure, the feeling of having dropped something valuable in a room she hadn't yet secured. She remembered spending 3 days after that being immaculate. Lena had not mentioned the 3 days of immaculateness in the entry. She had just written, I said yeah. She had said yeah. That had been the right answer. And Soleil had spent 3 days after it building the better performance. She sat with this for a moment. She let herself sit with it without immediately converting it to something else. She read the month 4 entry about the program. She ran the program on me today. I knew what it was. I let her anyway because I like it when she tries. And then, I know her well enough now to know that the program is not the opposite of real. It's what she does with real when she doesn't know how else to offer it. So I take it. And I wait. Lena had let her run the program knowing it was the program and had waited anyway. Soleil had not known this. She had known, in the way you knew the things you refused to examine, that Lena saw through her, that was part of what had made her dangerous, the specificity of the seeing. But she had not known that Lena had been receiving the program as a language rather than a deception. Had been translating it, quietly, without saying so, into what it actually meant. Dani had done the same thing. For 5 weeks. She turned to the month 6 entry and read it slowly. The one about the day something real had come out between them unexpectedly. Lena's account of it was careful and small, the way she wrote everything, specific about the moment and quiet about what it meant. She had not made it a thing. She had just let it exist. Then, near the end of the journal, in the last several entries, a shift in tone. Not darker, Lena's voice didn't do dark, but more weighted. The writing of someone who could see what was coming and was choosing to be present for it anyway, in the way you chose to be present for a difficult thing because you understood that being present was the whole point, even when it cost. Soleil read. She's going to go. I know she is. Not because anything happened, nothing happened, and that's almost the hardest thing. Nothing happened and she's going to go anyway because she's reached the end of what she can let me know without it becoming something she can't control. I've been watching her get quieter for 2 weeks. Not the managed quiet. The other kind, the kind that happens when someone is packing up in the part of themselves they live in. I keep thinking about what I should say. I keep rehearsing sentences. And I keep arriving at the same place, which is, if I say the right thing it will look like I'm trying to make her stay. And she'll hear it that way. And she'll be right, in one sense, and wrong in another, and I don't know how to say the thing that is true in the second sense without it sounding like the first. So I say nothing. I say nothing and I am present and I wait, and she goes quieter, and I think, this is what it costs to love someone who doesn't yet know that being loved doesn't have to be a danger. Soleil's hands were cold. She had not noticed until now that her hands were cold. The kitchen in the early hours was several degrees below its daytime temperature, and she had not thought to bring a sweatshirt, and she noticed, distantly, that she was shivering slightly. She did not go to get warmer. She did not want to interrupt the particular quality of being in this moment, in this kitchen, alone, with this. She read the last entry. She read it the way Dani had probably read it, at the end, in whatever light was available, with the specific weight of having arrived at the end of something. She read the two I wouldn't haves, and she understood, with a clarity she had been avoiding for 8 months, what Lena had meant by them. She had not been saying, "I am a trustworthy person and you were wrong not to trust me." She had been saying, "The knowledge would not have become something between us. It would have just been part of knowing you. The way you know someone you love, not as evidence, not as leverage, just as the texture of a person. The texture of you." Soleil put the journal down on the counter. She put both hands flat beside it, and she breathed, and she looked at the circle of yellow light on the cutting board and the darkness at the edges of the kitchen, and she did not perform anything because there was no one there. She had left before Lena could know the ending of her. She had understood this as protection, of herself, of Lena, of the thing between them that she had not trusted to survive being fully seen. She had told herself she was being responsible. She had told herself it was better this way, cleaner, that Lena would find someone easier to love and would not miss her in any way that lasted. Lena had missed her in a way that produced 8 months of journal entries and a notebook placed in a gap behind a freezer with the care of someone who understood that some things deserved to be witnessed even if the only witness was a building. Soleil washed her hands. She turned on the hot water first and waited for it, which she did not usually do. She let it run warm over her cold hands, and she stayed there at the sink for longer than was necessary, and she thought about Dani, who was somewhere in this building, sleeping or not sleeping, with 1 day left before she walked out the door she had been walking toward for 22 days. She thought about what Dani had said Thursday in the argument that wasn't an argument. "I didn't want to watch you build a better performance." She had read the whole thing. She had known Soleil from Lena's map, the program, the exits, the composure that increased when something was real, and she had been in the kitchen every morning anyway. Not trying to help. Not trying to fix. Just there. Doing the work. Leaving the space. "This is what it costs," Lena had written, "to love someone who doesn't yet know that being loved doesn't have to be a danger." Soleil turned off the water. She dried her hands on the dish towel, and she stood in the kitchen in the dark and the circle of yellow work light, and she thought about the cost. What it had cost Lena to stay until she went. What it cost Dani to be the person in the room who did not require anything. What it cost to offer that kind of space to someone and simply wait. She thought about what it cost to keep leaving. She turned off the work lamp. She put the notebook back in its gap, spine against the wall, cover facing out, and she straightened up and she stood in the kitchen and let her eyes adjust to the exit sign light, that particular shade of red that she had come to associate with the end of shifts, with the kitchen at rest, with the color of finishing something. She was going to be in the kitchen tomorrow morning. 1 day before Dani's release. She did not know what she was going to do with that. But she knew she was going to be there. Not performing being there. Not managing the quality of her own presence in the room. Just there. She went upstairs. She did not sleep, but she lay in the bunk with her eyes open and the ceiling tile above her, and she let the hours pass, and she did not fill them. Chapter 17, She Doesn't Run. Dani had been watching people leave for 18 months. Not leave, not the way she was about to leave, the formal departure with the paperwork and the box of belongings and the Bev-administered handshake that passed for ceremony in a place that understood ceremony was mostly what you made yourself. She meant the smaller leaving, the way people moved in facilities and halfway houses, the constant low-grade withdrawal that was the background radiation of institutional life. People left rooms. Left conversations. Left the version of themselves they had committed to in intake sessions. They left quietly, usually. They left with the specific economy of people who had learned not to require goodbyes. She had gotten good at reading the departures. She had made it a science because the alternative, caring about the departures, was expensive, and she had determined, early in Haverfield and reinforced at every point since, that she did not have the budget for it. She noticed, on Monday morning, that Soleil had not left. This required context, which was, the departure she had been tracking, for the past 72 hours, was Soleil's. Not Dani's own. On Thursday, after the argument that had cracked something open between them, she had been watching for the signs she had learned to watch for, the slight withdrawal, the reconstituted performance, the careful management of proximity that meant a person had decided they were safer at a distance. She had seen these signs before. She had been, if she was being honest, braced for them. On Friday, Soleil had been in the kitchen. Different than Thursday, but present. Not fully reconstituted, the argument had left something changed in the air between them, a quality of new territory, uncertain and unresolved. But present. She had done the prep. She had run the line. She had not performed at Dani and she had not frozen her out. She had been in the room without explanation. On Saturday, Dani had her day off. She had not known what Soleil was doing with the Saturday. She had spent the day in the chair by the wall with her book and the number, one day, now, and the specific difficulty of a number that had been an abstraction for 18 months and was now a thing she had to actually walk toward. On Monday morning, she came into the kitchen at 5:20 and Soleil was there. Not at her station. Not assembled into the version of herself that showed up for shifts. She was at the prep counter with both hands flat on the surface and her eyes not quite focused on anything, and the quality about her of someone who had spent a night doing something harder than sleeping. She looked up when Dani came in. Their eyes met across the kitchen. A moment, long enough to register, short enough to survive. Then Soleil said, "I'll start the bread." Dani went to the range. She started the coffee first, the way she always started the coffee, and she watched the water come to temperature, and she did not look at Soleil, and she thought about nothing specific, which was harder than it sounded because her mind kept reaching towards something specific and she kept giving it the range, the burners, the temperature, the work. The kitchen had its own rhythm at 5:20 in the morning and it carried them forward without requiring anything. She cracked the eggs. Soleil worked the dough. The coffee came through at the right temperature. Ruthie arrived at 5:58 and went to her station without her usual commentary, which was either because she sensed the quality of the morning or because she had something respiratory still that was occupying her attention. Either way, the kitchen held its quiet. And the quiet was different. That was the thing Dani was tracking without naming. The silence between them had had different textures over the weeks, the early silence of two strangers doing work, then the silence of someone performing competence at someone who wasn't performing back, then the developing ease of people who had learned the shape of each other inside a shared task. Today's silence was something she hadn't catalogued yet. It had a quality of, she was reaching for the word. Aftermath. Not the clean aftermath of a thing concluded, but the particular morning after feeling of a thing that had changed shape overnight and was now a different size than it had been yesterday. She watched Soleil at the counter, not watching her watching. The bread dough was moving under Soleil's hands with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for weeks now, who had stopped performing the technique and was just performing the bread. Her shoulders were different. The set of them. Not relaxed, there was something alert in her, awake in a way that morning Soleil usually wasn't until the line was open, but not braced either. Not the performance braced and not the volatility braced. Something else. Present. She was just present. Dani turned the eggs and did not make anything of this. Ruthie came over at 6:15 to pull the biscuit tray and said, quietly, to the space between them rather than to either of them specifically, "Good batch this morning." She went back to her station. Dani filed this. Ruthie noticing without commenting. Ruthie confirming, in her indirect way, that she had also noticed whatever Dani was noticing, and was leaving it alone. The line opened at 6:15 and they moved through it in the way they'd moved through lines for 5 weeks now, the division of labor established and easy, no direction required. Soleil was at the end of the steam table and she was doing the thing she did when she wasn't performing the warmth, the actual version of it, the warmth that was just present because she was present, without the half-second delay and the calibrated deployment. She learned a name, the way she always learned names, but she didn't use it back immediately, the way she usually did. She just learned it and moved on. Dani watched this from her end of the table and thought, something happened. Not in a way that she could have specified. Not an event she could point to. More like, between Saturday morning and Monday morning, something in Soleil had moved. Not the dramatic shift of a person who had made a decision. More like the quiet movement of something that had been frozen and had thawed, not dramatically, not all at once, just a slight change in the quality of stillness. The thing that was different was not more openness or more vulnerability or any of the things the language of this place reached for when it described change. The thing that was different was that Soleil was not managing the space between herself and whatever was real anymore. She was just in it. After the line, the cleanup. Soleil moved through it the way she moved through everything now, clean and efficient and without performance, and Dani mopped the floor in the right order and thought about the fact that today was her last full day. Not her last day as an abstraction. Her last full day. The pickup was tomorrow morning, confirmed, a friend from before, from the life before Haverfield, who had said she would come, who Dani had not entirely believed would come until she had confirmed it last week on the house phone and found herself, briefly and unexpectedly, relieved. There was a room in Bridgeport. There was the possibility of the HVAC apprenticeship. There was a life that was hers, narrow and specific and possible, that she had been holding at the right distance for 22 days and was now going to have to look at directly. She thought about all of this while she mopped, and she let the thinking happen without building on it, which was how she thought about most things. The mop moved in its pattern. Far corner to near. At 7:20, Soleil said, "Do you need help with the packing?" Dani looked up from the mop. "The pickup is tomorrow morning," Soleil said. She was at the sink, her back to Dani, rinsing the last of the pans. "I don't have anything in the afternoon today, if you need a hand." "I'm packed," Dani said. "Okay." A silence. "When did you pack?" Soleil said. "Saturday." Soleil turned off the water. She turned around, and her face had the look it had in the mornings when it was not quite assembled yet, when the default state was still closer to the surface than the presented one. She was looking at Dani with something that was almost a question and almost something else, something that sat underneath questions. "Were you ready?" she said. "Saturday." Dani thought about Saturday. The chair by the wall. The book she had not really read. The number arrived at 1 and then sitting there, past noon and into the afternoon, and the particular quality of a number you had been counting toward for 18 months when it finally became today. "No," she said. Soleil looked at her. "Were you ever ready?" Soleil said, and her voice had the quality of someone who was not asking about packing. "Ready enough," Dani said. "That's the thing about done. It doesn't wait for ready." Soleil looked at her for a moment that was slightly longer than the conversation required. "I know," she said. And then, quietly, so quietly it barely reached across the kitchen, "I'm learning that." Dani heard the we in it. Not a word in the sentence said I. But the we was there underneath it, in the quality of how she said learning, as if the learning were something being done in the same room by more than one person. She did not name this. She finished the floor. She put the mop away. She washed her hands and she dried them and she turned around, and Soleil was still at the sink, not doing anything, just standing there in the kitchen that they had been in together every morning for 5 weeks, in the morning light that came through the east window and fell flat across the prep counter and made everything look like what it was rather than what it might be. "Thank you," Dani said. Soleil looked at her. "For the shifts," Dani said. "You run a good kitchen." Something crossed Soleil's face. Not the managed something, the other kind, the brief, ungoverned kind that appeared when the performance had nothing to work with. It lasted 1 second and it was real, and it was, Dani thought, the most real thing she had seen in 5 weeks of watching real things fall out. "You do too," Soleil said. Dani nodded. She went to the door. "Dani," Soleil said. She stopped. The kitchen held them for a moment. The refrigerator hum. The east window. The clock above the pass-through reading 7:31, and the day laid out ahead of it. "I'll be here," Soleil said. "This afternoon. If you want to say, if there's, I'll be here." Dani looked at her. She thought about the journal, behind the freezer, in its gap. She thought about Lena's last entry and what it cost to love someone who didn't yet know that being loved was not a danger. She thought about 11 days of not saying the thing and whether this morning, 7:31 on a Monday, with the pickup at 2 and Soleil's hands still damp from the sink, was the moment. She thought, not yet. Not because she was afraid. Because Soleil had said I'll be here, and I'll be here was not an invitation to a performance. It was an offering. It was Soleil, raw and unassembled in a Monday morning kitchen, saying, I am not going to exit first this time. That deserved something real in return. Not yet. But soon. Before 2 o'clock. Okay, Dani said. She went out. The hallway was empty. The ordinary sounds of the house waking up were underway, someone's door, the shower down the hall, Bev's clipboard already making its rounds. Dani walked to her room and she sat on the edge of the bed beside the box she had packed on Saturday morning, and she looked at the water stain in the corner of the ceiling that she had been using as a fixed point when she couldn't sleep, and she let herself simply be the person she was, in the room she was leaving, with the morning ahead of her. She had told Ruthie she would know when. She thought she might. Chapter 18, What Ruthie Said. Dani was at the utility sink doing the lunch prep dishes when Ruthie came and stood beside her. She did not say anything for a moment. This was different from Ruthie's usual arrival, which involved words and coffee and the low-grade monologue that functioned as her method of settling into a space. The absence of it said, this is deliberate. Dani kept washing. You're leaving tomorrow morning, Ruthie said. Yeah. And you still haven't said it. Dani rinsed the bowl in her hands. I'm going to. When? Soon. Ruthie was quiet. Then, you know what waiting without saying anything is. You told me. I'm telling you again. Because you have 2 hours and because I have spent 30 years watching people wait until there was no more time left and then discover, with great surprise, that there was no more time left. She leaned against the counter. You're not stupid. You know what you're doing. I know what I'm doing, Dani said. Then do it. Tonight. The water ran. Dani thought about the evening, the hours between now and 8 o'clock, the kitchen at the end of them, the last thing she had to say before tomorrow morning arrived and made saying it impossible. She thought about what Soleil had said this morning. I'll be here. The specific quality of that offering and what it had cost and what it was asking in return. She read the journal, Dani said. Ruthie was still. Saturday, Dani said. The cleaning crew moved the freezer. She found it. She turned off the water. She dried her hands. She knows I read it. A long silence. And she's still here, Ruthie said. Not a question. An assessment. Yes. Ruthie breathed out, slowly, through her nose. It was the sound of a person arriving at a conclusion they had suspected but not wanted to assume. All right, she said. All right, then. So I need to say it, Dani said. I need to tell her I found it. I read it. I put it back. And I'm still here. The words felt different out loud than they had in her head, less like a plan and more like the thing itself. Before 2. Yes, Ruthie said. Before 2. They stood at the sink together for a moment, not talking. The kitchen around them was doing its noon hum, the particular sound of a place that had digested one meal and was preparing for the next. Ruthie, Dani said. Thank you. She stopped. She was not good at this part. You didn't have to. Ruthie looked at her with the blunt, declarative patience of someone who had been told a lot of things she didn't need to hear. I know, she said. Go find her. She pushed off the counter and went back to her station. Dani stood at the sink for one more moment. She looked at her own hands, dry now, the hands that did the work and told what she was feeling before the rest of her caught up. She thought about Greta, in the rain, the parking lot, too late. She thought about the specific sound of a door you don't get to go back through. She went to find Soleil. The common room was empty. Soleil's room door was open and the room was empty. She checked the back hall, the laundry room, the small outdoor area that technically qualified as recreation. She found her in the last place, leaning against the cinder block wall that enclosed the yard, looking at nothing in particular, which was what people looked like in the yard when they were doing the work of being inside their own heads. Soleil turned when she heard Dani's footstep on the concrete. She looked at her. Not performing the look. Just waiting. I need to tell you something, Dani said. Before too. Soleil's chin came up slightly, not defensive, more like the posture of someone bracing to receive a thing they had already understood was coming. Dani said, I found the journal. The yard was quiet. A bird somewhere in the maple at the far corner. The distant rhythm of the street beyond the wall. I found it when I fixed the compressor bracket. 3 weeks ago, the Wednesday before the bread shift. I took it back to my room that night and I read it. She kept her voice the same, the flat, informational quality she brought to everything she meant. Not a weapon and not a gift. Just the fact. I read the whole thing. And I put it back the next morning. And I've been in the kitchen every day since. Soleil had not moved. I'm not telling you because I need something from it, Dani said. I'm telling you because you deserve to know. And because I'm about to leave and I am not leaving without you knowing. Silence. The bird in the maple shifted and was quiet. Soleil looked at her with the look that was not managed, not composed, not calibrated for effect. She looked at her the way you looked at something you had been trying to see clearly and were finally seeing. I know, Soleil said. I found it Saturday. The cleaning crew moved the unit. A pause. I went back and read the whole thing Sunday morning. Her voice was steady. The steadiness was real. I know you read it. Dani absorbed this. You've known since Saturday, she said. Yes. And you didn't. No. Soleil looked at the wall, then back. I didn't. I thought about it. I thought about, she stopped. I thought about the exit. Requesting the shift change. Doing it clean. A pause. I didn't. I don't want to do it clean anymore. I think I've been doing it clean for so long that I've confused clean with safe, and I don't think they're the same thing. Dani looked at her. The October yard was cool, the light flat and gray, the kind of light that made everything look like what it was without flattering it. She had stood in a lot of yards like this one. She had understood, in most of them, that yards were where people ended up when they needed to be outside a building without being outside the building. She was outside the building for the last time. She wrote the truth, Dani said. In the journal. Whatever version of you she described, that's not someone who's hard to love. I want you to know that. Something moved in Soleil's face. Through her face, the motion of something going all the way through rather than being stopped at the surface. I know that, Soleil said, very quietly. I'm still learning what to do with it. She looked at Dani. She wrote it about someone she knew. You're in a kitchen with someone who's been, a pause. A breath. Someone who has been learning how to be that person again. I know, Dani said. I've been watching. I know you have. They stood in the yard. The bird was gone from the maple. The cinder block wall cast a shadow across the concrete that was growing longer as the afternoon moved. You have a pickup tomorrow morning, Soleil said. Yes. A pause in which neither of them said the obvious thing, which was that tomorrow morning was tomorrow morning and this afternoon was still today. Tonight, Soleil said. The evening shift closes the kitchen at 8. I'll be there. Dani looked at her. Not a question. Not a plan. Just, I'll be there. The same offering she had made that morning, in the same voice, the one that did not perform certainty but had it anyway, the way a person had certainty when they had decided something in the part of themselves where decisions were actually made. Okay, Dani said. A last look, between them. Long enough. Not everything that needed to be said, that was tonight, but enough to establish that tonight was possible. That neither of them was going to take the clean exit. Dani went inside. Bev was in the hallway with her clipboard, which was where Bev always was, and she looked at Dani as she came in from the yard with the direct, unhurried attention of someone who had watched a lot of people get to the last day. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, pickup confirmed for tomorrow. 8 a.m. Yes. Bev looked at her. Then she looked at the clipboard. Then she said, not looking up, "You do right by where you are, Dani. You always have." She made a mark on a page. "Do right by where you're going to." She moved on down the hallway. Dani stood in the hallway and watched her go and felt, for the first time all day, something close to ready. Not the ready of having arrived somewhere. The ready of knowing that the last thing was still ahead, and that she was not going to run from it, and that she had never, in 22 days of counting, been more certain of anything than she was of being in that kitchen at 8 o'clock. She went upstairs. She sat on the edge of the bed beside the packed box. She thought about nothing for a while. It was enough. Chapter 19, 11 days. She had been not saying it for 11 days. This was the thing she had been turning over in the hours since the afternoon, in the room with the packed box and the water stain and the particular light of a Monday going toward evening. 11 days since she had read the journal and put it back and understood, with a clarity that had not been comfortable, that whatever she did next with what she knew was a choice rather than an inevitability. That was 11 days ago. In 11 days she had made the soup and mopped the floor and watched the real things fall out of Soleil in increments and had said nothing about the thing she most needed to say. She had told herself this was patience. She had been patient for 11 days, and the patience had been, not nothing. She had watched Soleil change shape inside it. She had watched the inventory of unmanaged moments grow until the managed ones were the exception rather than the rule. She had been in the room without agenda and without pressure, and the space she had made had filled, gradually, with something that was more real than what had been there before. The patience had been the right thing to do. She had believed this and still believed it. But Ruthie had also been right. There was a version of patience that was a form of hiding. The version where you had something real to say and you didn't say it because you were afraid of what happened when you said it, afraid it would land wrong, afraid the impact would close the door rather than open it, afraid that the saying would cost more than the not saying. She had been running that version of patience alongside the right version, and the two versions were not always distinguishable from the outside. She was not sure they were always distinguishable from the inside. She had been thinking about Greta. Not with the grief she usually carried, the Greta memory, the particular quality of a thing you'd done wrong and couldn't undo. More like evidence. Reference. The parking lot in the rain, the words "too late," the door that had already closed. She had been carrying that night for 4 years as a lesson about what happened when you waited too long, and she had arrived at vantage point with that lesson intact, and she had spent 5 weeks misapplying it. The lesson was not, say the thing before it's too late, at all costs, as soon as you feel it. The lesson was, make sure you are saying it for the right reason, and when the right reason is present, do not protect yourself out of the room. The right reason was present. It had been present since she understood, reading the last entry of Lena's journal, that what she felt for the woman in that kitchen was not a side effect of proximity or an artifact of the closed environment or the particular softness that came from having been nowhere else for 18 months. It was specific. It was Soleil Marchand, specifically, the woman the journal described, the woman the kitchen had been slowly revealing, the woman who was not the version she had arrived with and was not yet fully the version she was becoming, but was, unmistakably, one person moving from one to the other with the courage it took to move inside a building that was watching. She had the right reason. She also had tonight. She lay on the bed and looked at the ceiling, and she let the 11 days run backward in her head. Not as an accusation, she had done what she'd known how to do in the time she had to do it. But as a record. The way she kept records of kitchens, of broken equipment, of what needed attending to. Day 1 after the journal, the decision not to use it. Correct. Day 3, Soleil asking about the triangle fire. The conversation that had been real. She had not manufactured it. She had received it. Day 5, the salt opinion on the oatmeal. She had told Soleil it should go somewhere and Soleil had put it on the whiteboard and that had been the beginning of something. Day 7, the Ruthie conversation. Day 8, the bread shift. Soleil's mother making bread on Saturdays. The thing that had come out before it could be managed. Day 10, the argument. The pan rack. What are you actually waiting for? Day 11, the review. The file saying satisfactory. The coffee on the cutting board. 11 days. And in none of them had she said, I found something behind the freezer. I read it. I know you the way Lena knew you and I am still here. She sat up. The room was the particular gray of a building in late afternoon, the kind of light that happened when the sun had moved past the west windows and had not yet given up entirely. Outside, she could hear the house beginning its evening, someone's television, the dinner shift getting underway in the kitchen below, the ordinary rhythms of a place winding through another day. She thought about what she was going to say. She had been telling herself, for 11 days, that she did not have the right words for it. That saying it required a context, a moment, a version of the conversation that didn't exist yet. She had been waiting for the conversation to create itself and then simply being in it. This was not wrong. But it was also not all of it. What she understood now, in the gray light room with the packed box and the 8 o'clock hour approaching, was that she did not need the right words. She needed the right intention, and the right intention was simply this: I am not saying this to get something. I am not saying this to make something happen. I am saying it because it is true and because you deserve to know the true thing about yourself, from someone who found the evidence and stayed anyway. That was not a complicated sentence. She had been making it complicated because complicated things could be delayed, refined, held back until they were ready, and she was good at holding things back until they were ready and then finding that by the time they were ready the moment had passed. The moment was not going to pass tonight. The kitchen closed at 8. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at the water stain in the corner that she had been using as a fixed point when she couldn't sleep and would not be able to use after tomorrow morning. She looked at it for the last time, consciously, as a way of marking the leaving, not with sentiment, just with attention. You noted things. You updated the record. The stain was there. It had been there for 18 months, probably, or 30 years, or some stretch of time she had no way to measure. It would be there after she was gone. She got up. She washed her face at the sink. Cold water, she didn't wait for the hot, which was a habit she was going to try to break in the next chapter of her life, the waiting for hot water. Small things. The small things were the ones she had the most control over. She dried her face. She looked at herself in the mirror, not the long scrutiny of someone assessing a presentation, just the brief recognition of, this is me, going to do the thing I'm going to do. The face that looked back was not performing anything. It was just the face she had, the one with the scar along the jaw from the split decision at 22 that she had stopped explaining, the dark eyes that people said were appraising and which were, she knew, mostly just paying attention. She went downstairs. The kitchen light was on at the end of the hall. She could see it under the door, the warm, specific light of a kitchen in its last hour of the day, after the work was done and before the cleanup was finished, the light that meant someone was still there. She had come to know the difference, in 22 days, between a kitchen that was occupied and a kitchen that was empty. The light under the door was the occupied kind. She stopped at the door. She thought, for one moment, about Greta. About the parking lot, the rain, the voice that had gone careful. She thought about the specific sound of a door you arrived at too late. This was not too late. She pushed through the door. Chapter 20, the journal she starts. She bought the notebook from the commissary at 3 in the afternoon. She had not planned to. She had gone to the commissary because she was out of the specific brand of hand lotion she used, a practical errand, quantifiable, the kind that did not require her to think about what she was doing. She had stood at the small rack that held the personal items and the travel sizes and the modest selection of things the commissary stocked for people who needed the ordinary objects of a life without being able to go to a store, and she had seen the notebooks on the bottom shelf. Composition notebooks. The standard kind. Black covers. She had looked at them for a moment longer than she'd looked at the hand lotion. She bought one. She carried it back to her room and she set it on the desk and she stood back from it and looked at it the way you looked at something you had brought into your room that you were not sure what to do with. It sat on the desk in its plainness, the same kind as Lena's, which she had not been thinking about when she picked it up, which was what she told herself and which was not entirely true. She sat at the desk. She opened the cover. The first inside page was blank. Below the ruled lines, at the bottom, the faint logo of the manufacturer, which she had never looked at before on a notebook and was now noticing because she was doing the thing she did when she was avoiding something, cataloging the irrelevant details of the available surface. The desk. The window. The particular quality of the Monday afternoon light coming through at the angle it always came, making the shape on the wall she had stopped trying to name. She picked up the pen. She put it down. She picked it up again. I don't know how to do this, she wrote. Without an audience. I've been trying to figure out if that means there's nothing here or if it means I've never been safe enough to find out. She looked at what she had written. She had not planned those sentences either. They had arrived the way the bread thing had arrived on Friday, and the mother on Saturday's thing before it, without review, without the monitoring layer, just the true thing landing on the page before she could stop it. She crossed out the second sentence. Then she looked at the cross-out and did not rewrite it with something safer. She left the cross-out there, the black line through it, visible and present. The way she had left the cross-out on the goal-tracking form. She kept writing. The second entry, she did not number it, she was not thinking about this as entries, she was just writing, started, Dani leaves tomorrow morning. She read the whole thing. Not just the cover, not just the first page, the whole thing. Lena's whole thing, the 14 months of it, the program that was real and the learning how to be in the room and the I said yeah and the I wouldn't have, twice. She read that and she came back into the kitchen every morning. I don't know what to do with that. I'm going to try to figure it out. I think figuring it out requires staying in the room with it rather than managing it from a distance, and I am specifically bad at staying in rooms with things that matter to me, and I am aware of this in a way I was not aware of it 6 weeks ago. She stopped. She looked at the sentence. Specifically bad at staying in rooms with things that matter to me. She pressed this, the way Dani had described pressing the word fine, looking for the soft spots, the places where the word was doing work it couldn't support. She had left Lena. She had left the program at Caldwell before the real thing could happen there. She had left 2 relationships before that with the same clean efficiency, the same composed announcement that it was time to go. She had not thought of these as a pattern so much as a series of reasonable decisions made under the circumstances. She was beginning to understand that the circumstances had been the same in all of them. She had reached the point at which the other person might actually know her, and she had left. She had reached that point with Dani 3 weeks ago. She had not left. She was still here. This was not small. She had been treating it as small, as the baseline, the minimum, the thing you did rather than the thing you chose, and she was beginning to understand that for her, staying was not the baseline. Staying was the hardest thing she had done in this building, which had asked her to do a great many hard things. She wrote, I stayed. I don't know why I stayed this time when I didn't stay before. I think it might be that she wasn't asking me to stay. She was just there. And not needing me to perform for her, and not needing anything from me that I wasn't already giving, and I kept waiting for the thing she wanted and it kept not arriving, and then the waiting became its own thing, and then I was still here. I think the reason I stayed is that she made it possible to stay. Not comfortable, it has not been comfortable. But possible. And I had not known, before this, that possible was a different thing from comfortable. She wrote for 35 minutes. She did not look at what she was writing as she wrote it, which was new. She had always written with one eye on the writing, always self-editing in real time, always monitoring the voice on the page the way she monitored the voice in a room. This time she kept her head down and she let her hand move and she did not read back until she stopped. When she stopped, she read it. It was halting. It had cross-outs and incomplete thoughts and at least one sentence that didn't close properly, that just trailed off where she'd had a feeling she couldn't finish. It was the most honest document she had ever produced. Not because the feelings were new, she recognized most of them from the territory of herself she had been navigating for the past 6 weeks. But because she had written them in her own voice, without the performance layer, without the monitoring. Just, this is what it is. This is what I am. Not the version anyone is looking for. The other kind. She thought about Lena. She thought about the act of writing things down when there was no one to write them for. The act of leaving them somewhere in the building just in case. Just in case someone paid close enough attention. She thought, I am not leaving this behind a freezer. She thought, I am going to keep this and I am going to keep writing in it and it is going to be mine. Not a performance and not evidence and not something that needs to go to Priya. Just mine. She closed the notebook. She put it in the desk drawer, not behind the goal tracking form, not behind the folded piece of paper with her mother's name on it. She put it in the front of the drawer, where she would see it every time she opened the drawer. Available. Present. Not hidden. She looked at the drawer for a moment. Then she looked at the clock. It was 6:40. The kitchen closed at 8. The dinner shift was probably in its last hour, the cleanup beginning, the day winding down in the way days wound down here, not dramatically, not with ceremony, just, the work finishing, the lights going lower, the building settling into whatever the night held. She thought about the yard this afternoon. Dani's face, not composed, not performing the lack of composure either, just, steady and present, the way she was steady and present in everything, because that was the thing she actually was underneath the self-sufficiency and the short sentences and the books kept spine in. She was someone who stayed. Who showed up. Who fixed the thing that was broken and didn't mention it because the fixing was its own sufficient reason. She thought about what she wanted to say when she saw her tonight. She had told herself all afternoon that she didn't know. She had been very careful not to know, which was itself a kind of knowing. She had been keeping the not knowing as a hedge. If she didn't know what she was going to say, she couldn't anticipate its failure, couldn't preload the catastrophe. If she walked in without a prepared sentence and simply said what arrived, then whatever happened was real. She was going to say what arrived. That was the decision. It was the only decision available to her, and she had made it 3 weeks ago in the kitchen when she did not request a shift change and had been making it every morning since when she walked through the kitchen door and did not perform a version of herself for a woman who had never once required one. She got up from the desk. She went to the bathroom down the hall and she washed her face and she did not assemble anything. She did not put on the version. She let her face be the face it was, the one that had spent a Sunday morning reading in a cold kitchen with its hands cold on the counter, the one that had stood in a yard this afternoon and said this mattered without being entirely sure the grammar of the sentence was right. The face that was not composed and was not falling apart and was something else, some third thing she was still finding a name for. She looked at herself in the mirror. She was 34 years old. She had been performing for most of those years. Not all of them. There were years before she understood it was necessary, years when the real version of herself had been available without cost, years when the performing had not yet become the structure. She could not fully access those years anymore. They were behind too much else. But she knew they had existed, which was the thing Lena had understood and written down and left somewhere it could be found. She turned off the bathroom light. She walked down the hall toward the stairs. At the top of the stairs she stopped. She could hear the kitchen from here, the last sounds of the evening, the range cooling, the exhaust fan doing its irregular thing, the sound of a mop bucket being moved across the floor in a specific pattern. Far corner to near. She went downstairs. She put her hand on the kitchen door. She thought, I don't know how to do this without an audience. And then she thought, maybe the audience is me. Maybe it has always been me. Maybe the audience I needed was the one who was going to be present for this whether I performed it or not, because it was happening in the room I actually live in, and the room I actually live in does not have a program and does not require a version and does not give a satisfactory at the end. She pushed through the door. Chapter 21, What She Doesn't Say. She was in the kitchen before Soleil arrived. This was the thing she did not say, that she had been listening for the footsteps on the stairs for 20 minutes and had been relieved when she heard them, and that relief was a feeling she had spent a long time not allowing herself to have about another person. The dinner service was done. The crew that ran the evening kitchen had cleaned their stations and gone, and the room was in the particular state of a kitchen at rest, not dirty, not fully put away, the clean surfaces and the stacked pots and the good, honest smell of a place that had worked hard and was now cooling down. Dani had come in at 7:30 and had found the space she needed, which was a kitchen, and quiet, and something for her hands. She had wiped down the prep counter that didn't need wiping. She had checked the refrigerator seal. The cardboard wedge was still in place, still doing its interim work, still waiting for the real fix. She pressed it back into alignment with the tip of her finger and thought about the things you did to keep systems functional while you waited for the part to arrive. The part always arrived eventually. Or it didn't, and you found a different fix. Either way, you worked with what the kitchen had. She had been standing at the range, not cooking, just standing with one hand on the cold surface, when she heard the kitchen door open. She had turned around. Soleil was there. Not assembled. Not performing anything for the room. Just present, in the kitchen, in the clothes she wore in the evenings when she wasn't managing for an audience, the plain shirt, the hair slightly loose from where it had been kept up all day, the face that had been carrying a lot all day and wasn't pretending otherwise. They looked at each other across the kitchen. Then Soleil said, "I heard the exhaust fan from the hallway." "Belt's going," Dani said. "Still. It'll last another week. You won't be here in another week." The sentence landed in the space between them without armor. Not an accusation. Not a bid for something. Just the fact, said plainly, by someone who had been practicing saying facts plainly and was getting better at it. Dani looked at her. Here was what she did not say. She did not say that she had been carrying Soleil for 11 days the way she carried everything, without expecting to put it down, without assuming the carrying would end. She did not say that the journal had given her a language for something she had already been learning through the shifts and the silences and the small inventory of unmanaged things, that Lena's words had been like a map of a territory she was already standing in. She did not say that she had been afraid, specifically, that what she felt was a product of the closed environment, the particular intensity of two people inside a building, with no other exits, developing a closeness that would not survive the outside, and that she had spent 11 days checking this fear against the evidence and finding it did not hold. The evidence was specific. Soleil was specific. What she felt was not a function of proximity. It was a function of Soleil. She did not say any of this. What she did instead, she moved to the prep counter and she picked up the dish towel that was folded there and she held it without using it, because she needed something for her hands, and she looked at Soleil, and she said, "I want to tell you something." Soleil was very still. "I told you in the yard today," Dani said. "About the journal. But I told it wrong. I told it like a fact I owed you. Like information that needed transferring." She looked at the dish towel. "That wasn't wrong. But it wasn't all of it." Soleil waited. "The all of it is," she stopped. She started again. "I read the whole thing. Every entry. And I recognized you in the first 3 pages. Not from what Lena said about you, from what she described. The way you read a room, the way the composure comes up when something's real, the way you know where the door is." A pause. "I recognized it because I'd been watching you do all of it. In the kitchen. From day one." The exhaust fan cycled overhead with its irregular hitch. The kitchen held very still around them. "And then I finished the journal," Dani said. "And I lay in my bunk and I thought about putting it back. Which I did. And I thought about telling you I'd found it. Which I didn't. And I thought about whether what I'd read had changed how I was looking at you." She pressed the edge of this. "It hadn't. That was the thing I kept coming back to. It hadn't changed what I was seeing. It had just given me a name for what I was already seeing." She put the dish towel down. "She loved you," Dani said. "Lena loved you the way you deserve to be loved, knowing the parts you didn't show anyone and not needing them to be different. And you left before you could find out what that meant." A pause. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad about it. I'm saying it because I think you've been carrying the fear of being fully known for so long that you've been treating it as a truth about yourself rather than a habit you built. And it's not a truth. I know it's not, because I've been watching you in this kitchen for a month and what I've seen is someone worth knowing. The sentence was done. She had said it. The kitchen was quiet except for the fan and the distant street and the ordinary settling sounds of a building at the end of a day. The exit signs threw their ambient red across the floor, the light that appeared at the end of things and was neither alarming nor welcoming, just present, just the building doing what it did. Dani did not fill the silence she had made. She had learned this, that the silence after a true thing was the space the true thing needed to be received, and that filling it was a way of taking back what you'd given. She had the dish towel and the range and the 8 feet of kitchen floor between herself and Soleil, and she stayed inside all of it and she waited. This was the whole of what she had. She had been carrying it for 11 days without expecting to put it down, and she had put it down, and she did not know what came next, and she found, standing in the kitchen on the last night she would spend in this building, that not knowing what came next was not the same thing as being afraid. She had confused those two things for a long time. She was not confused now. Soleil had not moved. She was looking at Dani with the look that was the real one, not the managing look, not the performing look, not even the in-between look that had been developing over the past month as the performance thinned. This was further in than any of those. The look of someone standing at the exact place they had been avoiding and finding it was not what the avoidance had told them it would be. Not safe. Not comfortable. But possible. Dani waited. Chapter 22, What It Costs to Begin. The kitchen smelled the same as it always did at the end of a shift, bleach and old grease and something underneath both of those things that Dani had never been able to name. She'd stopped trying. Some things you just learn to breathe around. Soleil was wiping down the far counter. Not performing it, that was the thing Dani had learned to watch for, the difference between Soleil wiping a counter because someone might be watching and Soleil wiping a counter because it was dirty. Tonight, it was the second one. She'd been doing that more often lately. Small, unobserved things that were just true. Dani dried her hands on the dish towel and didn't say anything. She had been not saying it for 11 days. The journal was back where she'd found it, behind the industrial freezer, wedged in the gap between the machine and the wall. She'd put it back the morning after she'd read it, when she understood that whatever came next would have to be Soleil's choice, not something Dani engineered by holding information like a hand of cards. She wasn't good at most things. She was good at not cheating. They had been in this kitchen together for 5 weeks. 5 weeks of the prep and the line and the cleanup, 5 weeks of the left front burner and the inventory notebook and the exhaust fan doing its irregular thing overhead. 5 weeks of small true things falling out of a performance that had been running on diminishing returns since the first morning, 5 weeks of a silence between them that had changed quality so gradually and so completely that Dani could no longer remember what the early silence had felt like. She knew it had been different. She knew, from the inside of the current one, that it had been smaller. The current one was not small. She had said it, the fact of the journal, the reading, the putting back, the staying. She had said it in the yard in the afternoon and she had said it again an hour ago in this kitchen, stripped down to what it was. I read it. All of it. I put it back. And I'm still here. Not a confession, not a weapon. An offering. Soleil had not responded immediately. Not the managed non-response, not the smooth pivot, not the warmth deployment, not the professional-grade deflection she had used for the first 2 weeks when things got close. She had gone still in the way she went still when the body was deciding whether it was safe to do what it actually wanted to do. And then she had said, quietly, after a long time, I know. I read it too. And then she had said, I need a minute. And Dani had given her the minute. Had given her more than a minute. Had turned back to the counter and done the things counters required and had waited in the way that was not passive, not the absence of wanting, but the active choice to make space rather than fill it. Soleil had wiped the counter. The minutes had accumulated into the end of the shift. Soleil turned off the overhead fluorescence, her job, always, because she was taller, and in the low ambient light from the exit signs the kitchen went the particular shade of red that Dani had come to associate with the end of days. Not in a bad way. Just, this is the color of finishing something. You're doing it again, Soleil said. Doing what? Looking at me like you're waiting for something. Dani leaned back against the counter. Maybe I am. Soleil's jaw did the thing it did, a small, almost imperceptible tightening, when she was deciding whether to deflect or to actually answer. Dani had catalogued this without meaning to. She had catalogued a lot of things without meaning to. I'm not a project, Soleil said. But she said it without the usual armor on it. It came out almost like a question. I know. Then what are you waiting for? Dani looked at her for a moment. The red light. The bleach smell. Tomorrow morning she would pack the last of her things into the box and carry it downstairs, and Bev would do the paperwork, and the car would come at 8 and she would get in it and go to a room in Bridgeport and an apprenticeship and a life that was hers, narrow and specific and possible. She had been holding on to possible for 22 days at the right distance so she wouldn't build on it prematurely, and the distance had served her, and the distance was done now. For you to stop deciding, Dani said. One way or the other. I'm not going anywhere tonight. Soleil set down the cloth. She had a way of going very still that most people probably read as composure. Dani knew better. Stillness like that was the thing before movement, not the absence of it, the moment when the body was deciding whether it was safe to do what it actually wanted to do. There's something, Soleil started. She stopped. She picked up the cloth again, then put it back down. The cloth. The counter. A motion that wasn't about the counter. There's a version of me, she said, that I haven't. She stopped again. She had been building this sentence for a long time. Dani understood that. Not this specific sentence, not these words, not tonight's kitchen, not the woman across the room who had a packed box upstairs and a car coming in the morning. But the shape of the sentence. The sentence that began with who I am when I'm not performing it. The sentence that Lena had been waiting for and that Soleil had left before she could finish it. The sentence she had picked up and put down in the kitchen every morning for 5 weeks, in the salt opinion and the bread and the argument and the coffee on the cutting board and the notebook in the drawer with its crossouts. She had been practicing the sentence for a long time. Take your time, Dani said. And Soleil looked at her, really looked at her, without the performance of it, without the careful calibration of what Dani wanted to see, and opened her mouth. The real version of me is. The kitchen held its breath. The exit signs bled their red light across the linoleum. Outside, somewhere, a bus was running its route whether anyone needed it or not. And Soleil kept going.